to start with Professor Barry Popkin, and we are very happy to have you here. Professor Popkin is a W.R. Keenan Jr. Distinguished Professor of Nutrition at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He has a PhD in economics and established the Division of Nutrition Epidemiology at the School of Public Health at the University of North Carolina. His research program focuses globally on understanding the shifts in stages of the transition and programs and policies to improve the population health linked with this transition. He leads the Global Food Research Program of UNC. He has played a central role in placing the concern of global obesity. He is working with 10 countries, including Mexico, Chile, Colombia, Brazil, South Africa, the UK, Thailand, Malaysia, China, India, and he works to develop tax and regulatory policies to create a healthier diet to reduce obesity and non-communicable diseases. He has received a number of major awards for his global contributions, including 2016 World Obesity Society Population Science and Public Health Award, UK Ranks Science Prize, the Obesity Society Mickey Stunkard Lifetime Achievement Award. He has published over 500 referee journal articles, and he's one of the most cited nutrition scholars in the world. So thank you for coming.
Thank you.
And let's start.
So this is what we begin with. We face a huge problem here, and we have no countries yet that have successfully dealt with this. We have a few countries that I think within 3 or 4 years will have started to reduce adult and child obesity. But to date, no one. I'll talk a little bit first about kind of the background, how our biology that evolved over millions of years and facing with modern technology and what that's doing to us. I'll talk then about the global food system, how it's really hit Israel and every place very much in the same way, and then shift to changing the environment and what we can do, and talk about some of the evidence that we have around the world for making changes, talk about a specific topic I was asked to that I had a scientific committee globally on in front of the package profiling. I had a global scientist from around the world that worked with a number of foundations and industries that funded it to work with finding the best front of the package profile. I'll talk a little about the industry GDAs because I know that's a concern here. And then I'll talk about what we do in the end to change the culture of eating and drinking and try to create a healthier Israel and a healthier world. So the underlying biology, we all know that we've really gone through a long transition. And really what's happened in the last 50, 100, 200 years in mankind is unprecedented. And the way we've changed how we move, how we drink, and how we eat, particularly since World War II. And we, on the other hand, evolved over a huge long period of time. Our sweet preferences, we needed sweets for fruits and berries, we needed those nutrients, and it's great. All of a sudden, though, we get the cheap versions of the same thing in our food supply, and it changes completely. Our biology isn't there to react, and so we're stuck. Similarly, for reasons that I won't go into in great complexity, when we drink something, it doesn't affect what we eat. So if you drink water, fruit juice, soft drinks, milk, you don't change your food intake. So what you drink adds to your calories, and if it's the wrong kind of drink, there's a lot of sugar in it, it adds extra problems that we now know and understand in ways we didn't 10 years ago. So that's another issue. And we needed that for evolution. We needed to drink water every day. If you die if you don't drink water in 3 to 7 days. But you could live, anybody in this room, for 2 months without food. Shockingly, but it's true. So we had times when we went through hunger throughout the world through our evolution. Our fatty food preferences, the same. We needed that to survive. But now we have a food supply that makes very cheap oils, very cheap fatty food. We deep fry food. We do things that we never could afford to do before the war and before the 50s and 60s when vegetable oils became very cheap globally. And last, exertion. From the time of the wheel onwards, we've really moved to cut our activity. And it's a huge shift in our life. this is I don't want to really go through this very much. It's hard for you to read it, but essentially, since World War II, Israel has really been going through a period of increasing changing its diet, changing its activity pattern, and changing the way it eats and drinks so that we've moved to a period of greater obesity, greater non-communicable diseases, and we need to find some behavioral shift, some way to get back to some more activity and to eating a healthier diet, and it is a very big challenge to the globe that most countries in the world are now beginning to try to face because we can't afford the consequences of not dealing with it. And in another way, think of it in terms of how we cook and eat. And you can just think in the last 50 years how the food supply has changed, how our understanding of preservation, the chemicals we use in the food supply, it's just amazing the changes, particularly since the 50s, 60s, and 70s. So with that, the way we eat has really changed, and I'll give you an idea about that. But I want to first start with activity. We really need activity to live. But in high and low income countries, we've seen enormous declines, and it's very hard to get it back. This is something we did for WHO and Nike, with part of a big change they were doing, where countries we had time data, the methods changed, but the activity in the high income countries, if you look in METs, if you had 150 METs a day total, this ignores sleeping and that part of the time, you would be not moving. So in the US, in the UK, the level of activity has gone down to small amounts of movement for the average person. Much of it's been at work. Our work activity has really declined. Also our home production activity, what we do in the home. Think of all the technology we have in the home. Later I'll show you for the US how much food we buy that you don't even do anything with. You heat it or just eat it. So, and then look at China. So China started off much lower technology, but with modern technology entering, once they joined the world economy, this is a survey, every 2 years we'd ask, do they stand, do they sit at work, do they lift, do they carry? And it's just changed immensely in that country. And the decline is still not the decline.
We should have this session standing. This is what
yeah, we should, yes, and stand and jump, and yes, and we do that often at meetings, but so China is moving in the direction. Israel was pretty active before the war. Farming was pretty primitive. Actually the globe, and I'll come back to that. So we need activity. Everybody understands for us to be healthy, we need physical activity. But we have to manufacture it today. We have to find ways to create it, and we're not going to offset. Much as I might like it, if I go to a good dinner, if I have some junk food, if I have something, I can't run it off. It would take a mile to run off. If we took that Coke Zero and made it Coke Red instead, it would take a lot of running to get rid of it. And we aren't going to get that in the world today. So we need to find ways to get activity, but it is not the answer to the world's obesity and diet-related non-communicable disease problems. And we know that today. And so we are shifting to understanding the food system. And our understanding of it has really changed. If you think of your country in 1950, farmers sold to small middlemen, and it went up the chain. There were little stores all over, markets all over. It was a very different world. Today, we're in a world where agribusinesses across the globe, retailers, food manufacturers, and food service companies really dominate our food system. Now, Israel, I don't fully understand, but I certainly understand how retailers have really conglomerated into smaller numbers. Now we have farmers markets only for the rich, and they're organic and healthy and wonderful, but you can't afford it if you're other. And so eating real food is really shifting. And fresh markets are shifting globally. For example, my state of North Carolina has more farmers markets than they have in the whole country of Mexico today, where I'm working, and we are very involved. And the point is, this has happened across Africa. So I was just in South Africa. They almost have no more of that. the supermarkets and the conglomerates, and farmers sell to retailers, farmers sell to food manufacturers, they sell to agribusinesses that buy the commodities, and they sell directly to the McDonald's and the food service companies, so that essentially we've got a system that's less defined by agriculture and more by agribusiness and food companies. And we have to understand that because it changes. We can no longer just subsidize farmer production. It's very hard to do that globally. We need to work through the food system other ways to change it. And it's something that we're becoming increasingly aware of across the globe. So I don't want to spend much time on this. It's way too complex. But the reality is, from developing technology in the 1800s, where genetics, nitrogen, fertilizer, all these things were created in agriculture. The first farm experiment stations, 2 of them which were sugar in the 1890s, one in Jamaica, one in Louisiana, later in Java, and agricultural research centers and universities in the US and a few in Europe but we took us until World War II to really modernize agriculture. We only had 1,000 reapers and other things in the US, and now we have hundreds of thousands. And we put billions of dollars after World War II into modernizing agriculture. You created your own way of doing it here, which was brilliant, but this was a global move, and the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, the European Bank, the Reconstruction, the African Bank, the whole global agriculture system was really transformed. And the mentality in the 1950s was grains first, then meat. We thought at that point protein was what would save the world. And so we subsidized those products. Global prices of meat are 1/5 right now, really, than they were in real terms in the 1950s and 60s. And grain and sugar and oils, commercial crops, much, much cheaper in real terms. So then our knowledge changed in the last 20 years, but we haven't created the same system. We don't have the money to put the billions of dollars into creating cheap produce and legumes and beans and other things in the way we did in the past. So in historical terms, we've created a very distorted agricultural system with cheaper products, the sugars, the oils, the meats, the refined carbohydrates than we have for the healthier foods today. So it creates even a bigger challenge. And I want to talk about a few examples. One is sweeteners in our food supply. So we took our country. Now our country has a lot of foods. We had between 1900 and 2000 and 2012, 1.2 million different products in terms of ingredients in our consumer packaged food supply with barcodes. That's bigger than most, but you probably have 30,000 in your food. And we've already done that many in terms of scanning in South Africa. They're unique in terms of ingredients. So the food supplies are really complex today, and they're really modernized. So we went through that, and what we found, and included in that fruit juice concentrate, which is increasingly used in food because it's unnatural and it seems healthy and organic to people, but it's sugar. And we looked and we found in our food supply, if you looked at the yellow, about 30% or so of our foods and beverages don't have sugar added to them. The rest have added sugars in them. You don't know the names of them. There's 150 different names for those added sugars. So you would be shocked if you saw the list of some of them. But the point is, we do it. And 10% of those in our beverages are fruit juice concentrate. So that even adds a more complexity. And what about our food supply in the US? When I grew up in the 50s, even earlier, and then at that point in time, most of what we bought in the grocery store was minimally processed, were ingredients, and we cooked at home, and we made everything. Today, I'll show you in a second, but we've moved to these highly processed ingredients in foods. Well, when I grew up, there was mayonnaise and margarine stuff. I grew up in a dairy state, Wisconsin, so we didn't get margarine, we only had butter, but the rest of the country had margarine. And so we did have some complex commodities, took a lot of processing. But generally speaking, our diet was very basic, and people cooked and made real food. But if you come to the food today in my country, the highly processed food that some people call ultra processed or highly processed has really shifted. And what we consume is very, very different in processing. And the amount of ingredients and the amount of cooking has really gone down. The average Brit and the average American spends less than a half an hour a day on food preparation and cooking. That is the world we're coming to today. We've gone down, countries that I worked in the 40, 50 years ago, we've gone down in those countries from 2 to 3 hours of food preparation to an hour. It's changing. Cooking is going. Cooking is gone in a younger generation. And I want to go on to the next one.
Why do you define, I see, salted nuts as moderately processed?
Because once you start adding and frying them and putting things in them, and it's not just the salt that goes with it, there's often preservatives and other things. You begin you add many chemicals. So potato chips are not just taking potatoes and frying them, there's lots of preservatives.
No, but other chips I understand. I asked about the nuts because it's just
the nuts they also have some other things in them, and they're fried and cooked. It would be basic if it was just a plain nut.
Okay.
But what's really important is that our diet today in the U.S. and your diet is becoming predominantly ready to eat. That means foods that are already there and you just eat them. Or it's ready-to-eat cereals that you just put a little milk in and you eat it. It's not cooking anymore. It's all the complexity of our diet. And in the U.S., 70% of our food comes from barcoded consumer packaged foods. A certain hunk comes from random weights, fruits, vegetables, meats, and other things, and a good hunk comes from food service. And even part of the food service is that ready-to-eat part mainly. And then ready-to-heat means pizzas, other things you buy, or young people call in on the internet and then they eat, but they heat up and that's it. So much of what we cook, so cooking is going across the globe. This is a global issue. And it exists in some cultures, but it's going quicker than you think. And it's moving toward these kind of goods. So this is the U.S. England is almost identical to us on these
you
same.
have to adopt in the States Saturday, Shabbat, because
Yeah.
you know everyone's
Yes,
cooking.
yes, but then people, it's already heated and cooked from the
Yeah.
day. It's no longer making the chicken the day before and everything. It's a different world today. Even in my Orthodox cousins, first cousins, it's a different world that they're in terms of what they eat. And this is our diet, but this is also the diet of England and many other countries. And it's the diet that's happening globally. It's a shift that you need to understand because we're facing a very different world today in terms of costs and prices and what people buy because of it than the world we faced even 10, 20 years ago. And the speed of change. Every village in South Africa, every village in Sub-Saharan Africa has a convenience store today, or a small store. And a lot of what they sell is the wrong kinds of food, very little fresh food. So this is not an issue of high-income America and UK. This is an income of a picture of the globe, how it's changed. Our food system has so transformed in the last 20 years across the globe. I can't go to any of my villages in China and not find a convenience store that doesn't sell much what I would call real food. And this is really the biggest shift that we need to understand. And the third one I want to talk about is snacking. And I'm talking about that because in my country, a snack was a rare occasion when I grew up. We would have maybe a little milk, we'd have an apple, maybe on a special occasion a cookie, something like that, but it was rare. Today, across the globe, snacking is one of the biggest growth sectors. You can ask my friends in the industry, you ask the Mondelez and others, it's the growth sector. It is where we are changing from 3 meals a day to 5, 6, 7, 8. We have and I'll show you, I'll give you a sense of that. This is my country, and the percentage of individuals consuming meals plus snacks. Together, at the 10th percentile, they're up to 7, 8, and it keeps going up every year. The number of, and our snacks are no longer an apple. Our snacks are chips and soft drinks and juices, and so it's the calories of our snacks are equal to our meals for a subset of Americans.
And the meals are not really meals because they're
Yes,
snacks as well.
yeah, that's right. That's exactly correct. And here it may be falafel or other things that are deep fried, but it doesn't matter what it is. It's and the chips and the snack foods and the juices and the other sugary drinks are really dominating. So the shift in how we are eating in the U.S. But now I'll show you China. When I started in China with a national survey representing about 50% of the country in terms of the states and the provinces we were in, we essentially had a tiny percentage of people snacking. And if they snacked, it was an apple. And it was very seldom. Today, if you look in the black, we have a huge percentage of calories. And if you go to Shanghai, Beijing, and Chongqing, 3 cities with 30 million or more, hard to imagine, but they are. It's up to 200-300 calories, and it's no longer. It's shifted. It's shifted from fruit and tea to, guess what? You know, the wrong kinds of processed food, because the food sector there has grown immensely. So in Israel, I mean, you're middle in the world among the higher consuming sugar sweetened. Your sales of sugar sweetened beverages are about 12th, 13th in the world in terms of how high up they are. Chile, Mexico, the US, Argentina, and Saudi Arabia, we're at the top. But and that excludes fruit juice, which I'll come to, which is another one. If you added fruit juice to you'd be up there with us.
But when we check teenagers, we see
Yeah.
that we are much higher. I think that we rank among
Yes.
the first 5.
That's right.
Five.
But as I don't have the sales data, you can only get to aggregate. If I do consumption, you're right. It's a very different game. And I want to talk about global obesity for a minute, because it's really changing in the way and how it's looking. And it's first of all, for the first part of the post-World War period, up to around 2000, much more of the increase in overweight and obesity across the globe was adult. But there's been a lag in every country. Adults have moved quicker, partly because activity's gone down a lot faster than it did for children. But now we're seeing every country a rate of increase for child obesity much higher than adults. But that's not the big issue. We're seeing the BMI, the body mass index, go up, and the waist circumference, so the going to the right. So heavy people are getting heavier in particular. We may have a cluster of healthy people on one end, but we're seeing this curve shift. But worse than that, something about diet and activity we don't understand. At each BMI level, I don't care whether it's Mexicans or Mexican Americans I show there, or in one paper, we took the UK, we took the US, we took some high-income countries. We are getting rounder. Our waists are going up for the same BMI. So metabolically, we're getting more fat around the heart and the liver for the same weight levels, for something in our diets that we don't understand fully yet, so that the effects on our liver, the effects on diabetes and hypertension are much higher. So the cardiometabolic, the health costs of that waist circumference increase is so much greater than the same BMI today has a bigger cost for us than that same BMI before. So now if you think about obesity, now think about just being overweight or
beyond
low
obesity.
weight. Yes, it's beyond obesity, it's overweight. And then there's genetic issues. Sephardic Jews have a much higher risk at a lower BMI of becoming diabetic. The same goes to some extent from Arab populations, so that we have within us, and Ashkenazis, we have a higher problem with some lipids. I'm one of them, you are some of them, and so we have some genetic conditions that came through evolution that affect us. But this issue, the increasing waist for all BMIs, is meaning that overweight people today are what obese people were yesterday in terms of cardiometabolic problems. So this is probably one of the biggest things that we're increasingly learning about, and it's scaring us even that much more. So what do we do about this? Clearly we need people to move more, but we're not going to move and cut our weight. It's going to take, not many of us are going to do like I do and exercise for half an hour to an hour in the gym every morning at 5 or 6 a.m. So it's not going to happen. we're not going to get that kind of exercise in the general population. So we have to deal with food, and we understand it increasingly. Even my friends at Coke are no longer going to say activity is the problem. It is a change that we realize and we're accepting globally. So that's where we come to lifestyle. That's where we come to ultimately needing to create a new culture of eating. But we have a lot of things to do before that, and we're starting to learn a lot. One of the things we've learned is we can't use trade controls because of the World Trade Organization, because of all the legal systems that go on around the world. When the Pacific Island countries tried to ban certain products, when other countries have, it doesn't work. We may have a little trade war where you tit for tat on raising something, but you have to do not export bans. You have to do things across the board, whether it's regulate, tax, voluntary, government. It has to be done in a different way. We've also learned a lot about taxation. We now have countries that are successfully doing it, and within the next year, I'm going to have 6 or 7 countries that are either taxing just soft drinks, sugary beverages, including juices in some countries, junk food in others, along with beverages. And that's one of the things we're learning about, and I'll come back on that. But we have to do domestic and international products equally when we tax. And this is also a period when governments are under great fiscal constraints, as well our populations. But it is shocking how many countries realize that the healthcare costs are getting so great, they have to do something. They can't afford to see a generation of diabetic youth by the time they're in their 20s. It's just a different world today. So where are we? Let me just talk about all the countries that have taxes. So I've been very actively involved with Mexico, where we've evaluated their sugar-sweetened beverage and their junk food tax, and we could talk about that later if you want.
We're just in the evaluation part, or
in everything.
In the program as well.
They're building it from the start.
Okay.
I led a beverage panel with a Mexican colleague for the Ministry of Health and Finance, and then worked with their FDA and Ministry of Finance in some things.
Okay.
So very involved, more involved than I ever expected. Hungary, where I haven't been involved, had a small tax on essentially what they call junk food, and it worked. Other taxes haven't been evaluated. We're just in the midst of working with Chile on that, and they're installing other taxes, and come to. A number of countries are doing it. There are at least 2 that will have a 20% SSB tax by the end of the year, Colombia and South Africa. Others are starting, and we've evaluated the Berkeley tax. It hasn't come out yet, but it had actually, in this wealthy little community where they only consume 40 calories a day of sugary beverages, they actually cut it to 36. So that, and sales went down, but retailers didn't lose. Neither in Mexico nor in Berkeley did we find employment loss. We found that the companies shifted products. They can sell many things. And we did not find an employment drop, shockingly. And we have papers coming out on that, one in JAMA, one in another eminent journal, talking about some of that. So that is an important issue. But many countries are doing more serious things, and we'll come to that later. But certainly one of them that's probably going to be the first country to really turn around obesity is Chile, and I'll talk more about what they're doing, but because they've linked the tax that they're going to start in a year to a front of the package profiling and to marketing controls. So they're putting them all together, which is a very effective way to do things. One of the issues that we face in the US, we face across the globe, is the global food companies have been buying up the juice industry. That would be okay. It's just like if it were like water or another healthy beverage. But a fruit juice really acts on our body, if you look at the long-term health effects, just like any other sugary beverage. It is, if you take that 300 milliliter, if you took that can of Coke Zero our colleague was drinking, and you put it with fruit juice, that'd be 3 or 4 oranges. And so if you eat 1 or 2 oranges, you get full. When you drink a glass of fruit juice, you don't get full. It acts like every other beverage, but it is as much sugar or more. Most fruits, in fact, have more sugar in them when you drink it than a
Even
Coke.
if you drink it with the fibers.
Even if you drink it with the fiber. The only time is if you just grind it up, it has a little slower filling, but it still has the amount of sugar in it. And that sugar has that kind of effect. So just think of a smoothie. That's like 5 or 6 oranges. Now, tell me if you could eat 5 or 6 oranges without getting full. That's the problem. Every long-term study we have to date on fruit juice shows an increased risk, particularly diabetes, but also energy and weight gain and so forth. But so it's an issue that countries are starting to put into the sugary beverage. We're starting to change from sugar sweetened in many countries to sugary beverages. So the South Africans are changing the term of their tax to sugary beverage tax. Other countries are starting.
The countries are taxing also fruit juice as well.
Yeah, they're starting to. It's just this year. It's not in Mexico. Well, we were facing a government didn't want the tax, so we were lucky to get what we got there.
And what about the diet beverages?
No, the only country taxing diet beverages are the French, who are annoyed that anything comes into their magical food supply other than water and wine. But they're the only country so far. Diet beverages, we don't have
cultural reasons.
Yes. We don't have a literature that shows that diet sweeteners really have a negative cardiometabolic effect. It's on humans. On animals, yes, but animals have 100 times the sensitivity, and so you can't believe those. You have to use human studies, and we don't have. So we are around the world, the International Diabetes Federation, the Heart Associations, across the globe, the health world, the WHO, we're saying treat diet beverages like water for the moment. Now, some countries
What about the other ingredients in the diet? You have other ingredients that are not good for you. So what about them?
That's a different issue.
That's something that we'll address in 10 years or so? Or?
Well, if you're talking about a diet beverage that has other chemicals in them, we have a long history now. We have like 50 to 60 years of diet beverage consumption and consuming of certain of the diet sweeteners. And we don't have toxic effects. We don't have cancers coming from it. We don't have, if you eat a healthy diet and you consume a diet beverage, we know it reduces your risk of cardiometabolic problems. If you consume an unhealthy diet, the diet beverage won't help you. That's kind of what we know.
Some people say that if you drink the diet beverages, it still preserve the need for sugar.
Right. So we have
total calorie intake is higher.
Right. The sweetness
not
preference.
From,
yeah.
Yeah.
So there are 2 studies on that so far, 2 random controlled trials, giving diet sweeteners. The population actually, they're water, diet sweetener, and soft drink. The diet sweetener population actually continued in the random control trial to drink less soft drink and eat less desserts than the water group.
Okay.
And so we don't have at this point, now there's a colleague, this was on adults. A colleague of mine is unraveling soon from Harvard, one on children, and we'll learn more then. But on adults, we don't have that effect. We don't know on children yet.
And but it's safe to tell children to drink that.
I wouldn't do it for preschoolers. I would want them to drink water and milk, but along after breastfeeding and all the other good things that we want. But I would not. It's happening. Look, we're getting too many kids around the world being fed Coke as their weaning food, or other juices and soft drinks. So, relatively speaking, I'd rather they substitute.
It's better for them to drink
yes,
drinks
than all that sugar. That's all I'm not pushing it. I would push for them water and milk. But so that's where we stand. And yeah, no, I had a meeting last summer in Berlin on just this diet sweetener question. We brought the world experts from around the world on the human side, not the animal side. And generally that's the consensus. That's the consensus of diet guidelines in the US, the UK, WHO that have done. That's where we stand today. Okay. Knowledge could change in 10 years. But right now, that's where we stand. But the first random control trial on children, I have to see, and that'll tell us more. But so far, no. So there are lots of countries trying to improve diet in many different ways. One that's probably very important to you is the whole issue of women and infants in the first 1,000 days, and that's important across the globe. And many countries are trying different ways to get healthy foods into pregnant women, to cut gestational weight gain, which is really critical, and to get kids after weaning into healthier diets. And you're very aware of the WIC program, and you're very aware that it's a health program and not an agricultural. So the children get not only, they go to a nutritionist, a dietitian, but they also see a doctor and they get, or a nurse, and they do both at once. It's an incentive to bring them to a clinic when they're infants, and they have to get these coupons. In our case, we don't have coupons anymore. Now we have an electronic card, but that's a complex system to develop. But whatever it is, and they can only buy certain foods with it. And they're healthy foods now, because it's a health program. It's our Department of Health running it, not our Department of Agriculture.
We have nutrition education.
Yeah, and they get education, and they get prenatal, they get weighed, and they get prenatal care, and if they're gaining weight, they get talked to more, and so forth, if they're moving off the curve in the wrong way. So that's a critical piece for you. We actually, and other countries, have been experimenting a lot on how can you get people to get healthier food. And for low-income worlds, to be honest, the cost of healthy food relative to unhealthy food, or to food that's really high in sodium, added sugars, unhealthy fats, and added sugars, and sodium, is very, very difficult. People are trying to give people money to go to farmers markets, money to buy fruits and vegetables, and coupons and other things. And there are lots of experiments in countries. And Mexico has stores across the really poor areas that do that. But the stores are government owned, but to make money, they're also selling junk food because they can't survive on just the other. But they do have subsidized. But it's been very difficult for the world to figure out a way to get fruits and vegetables and legumes and the healthier foods and the unfried and the lower sodium in without regulations. Trying these subsidies, trying the approaches. So I want to move on, but we certainly are still trying. We're experimenting in many countries on that, but it's been very, very difficult, partly because of the low cost of sugar, oil, sodium, salt.
Professor Popkin, what is happening in India?
India,
15%, 20% of the world, and it's very different by the culture of, for example, China.
India and China actually both are consuming so much oil. In India, it's very hydrogenated. The oil that they get, the vegetable oil ghee, they no longer can afford butter ghee, the way they used to refry it, has about 50% trans fats. Now, they're working in the industries to cut that, but it's horrendously unhealthy. And they have moved to deep frying because the oil is so cheap. So the increase, India's got two worlds. It's got 500 million really poor, malnourished people. But those people are starting to wean their babies with the wrong kind of food, junk food. So it's really changing in the rural areas, and we're getting this increases. But the India urban middle class is really shifting to a diabetic world.
You can see differences inside India, because India is very different in, for example,
the culture's changed.
You have many countries with different cultures.
Yes, that's right. I speak Hindi, and I've lived in India, and I'm working with the government there. And they just changed to VAT. They were going to do some excise taxes, so it's hard to know how we're going to figure out what to do there. But the fact is that in India, the diabetes, I mean, they have 100 million going on 200 million diabetics, and it's a huge cost. So they don't. And China's rate of increase of obesity is the highest in the world. We have now, from our surveys using hemoglobin A1C, for a huge sample of adolescents in China and the U.S., we have double the diabetes in adolescents in China than the U.S. So the reality is these countries are getting fat. Now, not everybody in India. China's different. China doesn't have the poverty of India, so we'll leave that aside. But no, the Chinese culture retail sector in China is growing 50% a year, the sales. When we did our first national survey there, where we asked for each product, we looked at them. We go in the houses for 3 days and we do the survey, and very detailed, weigh and measure everything, and it's horribly detailed. But we took pictures of everything they ate. 33% of their calories came from packaged processed foods in 2011. I know in the survey we did last summer, when we get the data computerized, I bet it's going to be over 50%. And they're exploding. There's a retail outlet everywhere. Their chains make your chains look like nothing. And it's not just Carrefour and Walmart. It's Chinese chains and Korean chains and Hong Kong chains. But it's changing the country.
But it's the same global companies.
It's the same,
Nestle.
yeah, it's the same. And whether it's a clone in China or a U.S. company, there's a China Coke and there's a U.S. I mean, it doesn't matter. It's the same product, or worse, because the domestic companies are less regulated, and they often have more sugar and more sodium.
But it's the global chain. It's the global.
It's a
brands.
globalization. No, it's not just a
It's not
global
the same
brand.
products.
It is partly.
It's not the same companies.
Coke will be there, and Coke will have a share, but there
Okay.
will be Chinese companies that have copied them and are very aggressive.
Okay.
And the retailers, the biggest retailers in China, are not from the U.S. and Europe.
Also, the biggest manufacturer in China are not one of the international companies.
Yeah, it's part of the global community. Actually, probably tons of your ingredients and your products come from there. You'd be surprised in your packaged foods. But going on, regulation of advertising. One of the things that we've learned increasingly is when you put a ban, could be very inclusive like Chile, on just children, that the advertising gets shifted to other age groups. But the kids still see it. It's a very complex issue to start to realize. Now, there's under the media kind of advertising, Facebook, cell phones that teenagers and younger get. You can't touch. It's hard. In Chile, they can ban what's in Spanish that comes from within the country, but you can't ban Facebook that comes from the U.S. or elsewhere. So, some advertising we'll never deal with. But Chile is probably my model country because they had a very complete child ban that started this July, but next July they'll start a ban from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m., all media, all ages. You can't go to a soccer event there and you won't be able to see a Coke sign or a junk food sign because the logo and stuff, and we'll come back to that. But the point is that you've got to be very wary. If you're just focused on child marketing, it'll just shift the advertising to other programs that kids watch and parents.
But how do you control Facebook and YouTube and
That,
other,
unless it's in Hebrew and it comes from within your country, you can't. You can say ban that and companies internal, but I could then do my Hebrew from some other country and you can't touch it. So it's that's the part we haven't figured out. That's going to be global. And that hasn't happened yet, and I don't know when it's going to happen because it's such a big part of the money of the Facebooks of the world. And then all the other kinds of technology that keeps coming in the internet. But that is not still the bulk of the advertising, and that's not what influences parents and others. So that we still really have other ways to consider, and we must. So the front of the package profiling, I'm going to come back to because I want to talk about a little more because I was asked because I know that it's something you're very interested in your country, and I want to talk about the food service sector. We have really not yet, other than calorie or sodium labeling, a few countries are considering, there's been a lot of experiments, that if you get calorie labeling and you require the fast food sector, the food service sector, charge for each calorie the same price in the same product. So, but you don't have so much supersizing like we do. But if you come, my country, that really matters. So in Europe, it really matters, and Asia and other places where you get large versions of the sizing. But nothing yet has really focused on the food service as a country other than Singapore, where they took all the hawkers and vendors, put them in sanitary environments together, and they work with them on healthier oils, cutting sodium. And it seems to be working, but it's not enough. We have to work on ways to control the deep frying and stop it and other things that are very complex. We have a long way to go to learn. Schools, that's the one that most of the world's dealing with, easier. It's the easiest. Easier to ban. Tons of countries have essentially banned the marketing of unhealthy foods and beverages in schools. Many countries have banned junk food and SSBs in the schools completely. Some countries only for elementary and secondary, but for high school they allow in some of the beverages and foods. But and some have even reformulated milk that schools get or other kinds of things. But the reality is it's a tiny piece, and kids can bring things from home, and kids often do. So, and that right outside the schools you can buy things. So it helps and it's important, and we need to do it, and we need ministries of education to get involved. But it's only a piece of changing the culture. The problem is we had one country that reinstituted cooking, England, under Blair, and they put kitchens at every 5th and 6th grade school. And the boys and girls were being taught to cook, but now the money went away when Cameron became so it's a very sad, because that was the first country that had gone back to teaching kids to cook again. Because when I grew up, the girls were taught to cook, the boys were taught to do something else, you know, but I'm a cook now. But the reality is that in the world that we have, kids and young adults don't even cook. And it's happening increasingly across the globe. It's certainly in your country. I mean, I talk to some of the kids in the streets, and they don't even know.
Kitchens are getting bigger. You know,
kitchens are getting bigger.
The center of the house.
Yeah,
not,
right. It's the center of the house, but it's the center for eating, because we grew up in that world where food is the center of our culture, but it's not eating cooked food anymore unless you come select. Only a select, high-educated, higher-income population in the globe is increasingly coming back to cooking. They've leave it and they come back.
So the Jamie Oliver programs in the UK are...
they work for me or you, but they won't work for the bulk. Mm-hmm. And so we come back to our broader food system. And there's only a few countries that have really worked on that. And I want to talk and this is in a different sense. So Brazil has required that every school purchase 30% of their food from small local farmers and co-ops. And 70% of their food in the schools must be real food, not packaged processed, but real food.
How did they do it politically? I mean,
they
it looks
have,
like such a...
the government funds it.
Okay.
And no, politically it was very good because they did the employment part because they got the small farmers around every city. And so it was civil society helped.
Okay.
It was... that's how it happened. Now, it's been rolled out in many of the states, but it's state by state that it's happening, so it's not complete yet.
Within Brazil? Within Brazil.
It's a big country, 175 million. I'm working there. It gets bigger every minute. Otherwise, really, other than farmers markets, and those are for high-income consumers, that we're seeing this huge increase across the world. Particularly it started in Europe and the US and spreading to your country. It's spreading to high-income populations all over. But it's not really, it's too expensive for the bulk of the population. And the old farmers markets of decades ago when farmers would sell at their farm and people would go to them, those days are gone, and generally. So that we haven't yet figured out how to deal in this broad sense with that part of the market. So what are we really doing? We're doing things like taxing, marketing controls, front of the package profiling are the three big kinds of things that we are trying to do right now that's pretty universal countries are thinking about or implementing.
What about reformulation?
That's part of the front of the package profiling,
okay.
And I'll come to that.
Okay.
I'll come to that in a very serious way. So Mexico has had some very strong, tiny taxes really, but Mexico is such a high consuming country that the 10% as sugar sweetened beverage tax actually did cut consumption. Over the country, 6% per capita of purchases of sugar sweetened beverages went down. For the poor, 17% in the first year. The second year we are just finishing up, it's about down to 10%. So don't believe the ads and the companies that say it's not going up, because it's not. And you taking their sales data and going from aggregate sales to per capita sales, they had a big population increase, a lot of in-migration, other stuff. It was even in their data. When you do per capita, it was going down. So sales, so the tax works. The junk food tax worked is not, similarly, not quite as big. It was an 8% tax. And now we're doing more detailed evaluations, even looking at biomarkers, just this summer. Chile, the first SSB tax is under, we're just evaluating right this moment. We just got the data and we're cleaning and organizing it. But the marketing will take time, and we're certainly doing that. French have taken around 4 years and are still evaluating their tax the French way, I guess. But Hungary has published some data on their tax that shows some positive impact, but not really great studies, if you ask me. The Mexican tax, it passed through the prices. It's a big country. The bottler there is one of the biggest Coke bottler in the world. They own the Coke bottling in Mexico, Colombia, most of Brazil. They own radio, TV stations, all sorts of things. They passed the prices through. They didn't eat them. It doesn't tend to be that we find taxes in any country. Even Berkeley, they passed them through. We thought they would eat them in these countries because they were the first in the world. Not true. It's just bottlers don't have such a huge margin. And no retailer does it. Coke doesn't. So that we find the taxes tend to work on the unhealthy foods and beverages so far in what we've seen. And countries are beginning to look to these taxes. The best way to do the taxes, of course, is like Mexico or like Colombia, where they're going to put a hunk into health, and Mexico into potable water. In Colombia, all the taxes can go into child health programs. So obviously that's the nicest thing to do. It can't always happen politically. Countries need revenue, but it helps to sell it. What we did in Mexico, Mexico was declining trend. So one of the things that's happening in a lot of the world, once you start talking about sugary beverages and taxes, people stop consuming them. Consumption starts going down, so you see a decline. So then you have to look at the tax increase of decline. And that's what we found in Mexico. There was a decline going on, the tax increased it. And that's the question. Whatever, it's an increase, that the tax shifted. You just need to observe that and understand that, and that's critical. And so we found that, and we found that particularly for the poor, a big decline. These slides are too hard to read, I apologize, so I'll move on. But we found a larger decline among the low SES at the top. You can't really see it well, I apologize with the lighting, but the fact is the poor are much more price sensitive. And so from one sense, if you're an economist, you talk about regression in a number of ways. From the point of view of who had to change their consumption the most, the low-income populations will always change it. From the point of view who paid the most tax money, it was the high-income Mexicans that paid it. From the percentage of their food expenditures, they paid the highest amount. But if you want to talk about percentage of income, they paid the lowest. So it's a question of how you look at this regressivity, because it's one of the issues. So, and from the health benefits, in Mexico, probably like here, the population with the highest diabetes, the poorest treatment of it, the poorest control, and for other health problems, we generally find in most of the world today, we're beginning to get more health problems in the poor than we are in lower SES groups and minority subpopulations. So it's really critical to think about these things, and it's politically difficult. Your country, it's horribly difficult. The cost of healthy food is horrendous here. The cost of unhealthy food is very cheap. So, but the point is that we find it really matters, and we find very positive effects. So we find it for the junk food, and we find it for the other tax. And I'm not going to go into these. So in Berkeley, even in Berkeley, a rich little haven in California, we actually found that the tax was passed through. We actually found that sales declined in the stores, but we found that the retailers didn't lose any money. People were buying other things. just the sales of the SSBs went down, but their sales per transaction actually went down more in the stores around the neighboring Berkeley than they did in Berkeley itself, so that they actually weren't hurt. So I want to come to front of the package profiling, and I want to talk about it because there's 3 or 4 systems in the world being used. There's the negative system where you take either foods and beverages, or you go food group by food group, and you call unhealthy foods based on WHO criteria. We want to reduce added sugar, we want to reduce added sodium, unhealthy saturated fats, we want to get more whole grains and fiber, we want to increase fruits and vegetables, legumes in the diet. Using those criteria, some countries have created negative, a negative, just a simple item. Others are very complex, the traffic lights, which actually can't find working. I'll come back to that because it's a very complex system based on the total diet, and I'll come back to what my British colleagues are trying to do, the people pushing it to try to find a way to have it work. Most countries have used the positive logo. It's legally required in another week in Thailand, it's legally required in the Netherlands, it's voluntary in a number of countries around the world. It varies, but it's increasingly growing. And then you have the GDAs, the Industry Guidelines for Daily Allowance, and I'll talk about 1 study or 2 studies we've done on that. But generally countries are moving away from that because we haven't found it has an impact, we haven't found it affects reformulation, we haven't found any effect of it. So we go from simple guidance. On the right is the Colombian negative. It says high in calories, it could be high in sodium, high in sugar, but it has that. The positive is it could be a tick, it could be a healthy choice, whatever it is. Then we go to really complex guidance, and we go down, all the way down to our back panel, which doesn't matter. We also find in our studies in the US, in Mexico, in the UK, the average consumer spends 6 to 8 seconds buying something. So if you put something complex on the package, forget it. If you're a low-income person going through a store, you need something simple. You need it on the package, you need it on the shelf that says these fruit and vegetables are healthy. You can't have something complex because 6 or 8 seconds you don't do much, and that's what people spend. It's shocking but this is every kind of study done on this. That's essentially the nature of the time frame. So these are some of the countries with the positive logo, and you see it's an enormous number of countries, and it's growing. And I don't care what system they use, all of these countries base it on food group by food group. The Australian system is kind of weak because originally it was a scientific-based system, but then the very conservative government said industry has to approve everything that you do, so the Australian STAR system they have now allows in a lot of food that I wouldn't want my child to eat, or grandchildren. And but this is really becoming more the system. So we evaluated in Mexico, and people have done the same in a few other countries, the guidelines for daily allowances. Our Institute of Medicine did a huge study on it and found it was just too complex and confusing for consumers. It just wasn't right. But more what we found is country to country, the guidelines they use, the amount of sugar they use, was based on older things. So in Mexico it was 98 grams of sugar. It was versus the the American Heart Association. They said it was the American Heart Association guidelines, but in the US, the American Heart Association guidelines at that point were 25 grams, 100 calories a day of sugar. They took the old ones from 20 years ago and used it. And every company varied it. So it's not based on modern guidelines that are very strict, but that aside, when we took in 2 or 3 countries, these studies have been done now, taking dietitians, master students, MPHs with an RD degree, registered dietitian, that really know food and are quite well educated in nutrition, it's very hard for them to understand it. This was the sugar side of it. I don't want to go into the details, but very complex. That's how they decided in Mexico the sugar. They said You need a certain amount of sugar from fruit, a certain amount from dairy, and then you get some added sugar, and they came up with the 96 grams that they allowed in that country versus the 25 that then they said this was the American Heart Association guidelines. And they put it on products, and what you would find is that they would take the children's products and they use the adult guidelines. And so that then you would find no sugar, 12 grams of sugar, 10% of what you needed. You know, it's kind of very misleading for a family. And the same for all these beverages. I'm just going to go really quickly. I don't want to. And then they took big beverages like this, where people drink them in one swoop, and they took the serving sizes. Instead of saying it was there are 3 servings in there or 4 servings, they 2.5. They took the one little serving regulation and did that. And so we did a study, and we found out what percentage of the master students correctly figure out what was a healthier or unhealthier food. And almost none of them could, and it took so long to do it. They just didn't have the time. So the conclusions in that study in Mexico, they were very arbitrary. They varied by company within it. In my case, we've seen them vary country by country completely. They don't use the current WHO or other international recommendations. The countries apply them quite differently. You can't really easily put a child's RDA and then an adult together on it, and so they use the adult, and it's just too complex. In general, it's like our Institute of Medicine, and it doesn't get reformulation. We have not seen it produce it in any country. So the only system we've actually seen where they've done research on the reformulation and they've shown it was doing the positive logo from the Dutch. It could be the negative logo if it was food group based, but if you take a category, salty snacks, you take a category, or savory snacks, you take a category like beverages or sugary beverages and all the beverage categories, and you have scientific criteria within each of these food and beverage categories. And most of these systems have 30 to 40 categories that work it out with the industry. They find then, when they put a positive or negative logo on it, they get reformulation. And I'll come back and give you some examples of how just in the first year of the choices, when it was voluntary in Netherlands, how much reformulation they had. Now, the traffic lights, which gets a lot of publicity because the United Kingdom, it's in the region and so forth, the person who pushed it from their Health Promotion Association, the Heart Association, Mike Rayner, right now he has 2 huge random control trials because he can't get people to use it and can understand it. Very complex. You have a green light for some things, a red light for other.
I want to ask you something about it because my personal, I think personally that this might be a good way to go because some people need to reduce their sodium level and some needs to reduce their sugar level. So it helps you to adjust the profile of a product that...
But then you could have just a simple thing that said too much sugar or too much salt,
okay,
if you needed it. If that was, or you could do the positive,
so
or you could have a positive, healthy on salt, healthy on sugar, healthy on energy density. But to put both red and green confuses people, and they don't, and that's been the problem, and it's too complex, and given the amount of time. So but generally speaking, you'd rather have, see, this is where the marketing controls comes in. Countries have been using these with marketing. So there's a healthier food. There are many healthy foods that are lower in sodium and lower in sugar and have healthier fats. So why not promote the whole healthy food for everyone?
Okay.
And that's where even using the negative control or the positive and only allowing to be advertised the healthy foods.
So it's either good or bad.
Yeah. Yeah. Now the industry seems to go with the good. They'd rather you say what's healthy and then they can market those than what's unhealthy. Generally speaking, the healthy, that's why more countries have picked up the healthy approach. But Obviously, the industry would prefer the GDA, but here's the reformulation. I want to give you this was the first 2 years of when it was voluntary, before it became a national requirement. This is the number, so that we're going back, of the 47 companies that joined it, 800 products they reformulated in just the first year. And because it was product group by product group, it gave strict guidelines. So it gave you a cutoff for sodium, for added sugar, for this product area. I think I emailed you a copy of that system. And if I didn't, I can run it, but I think I did, of the food groups. And so whether it's a positive logo or negative is a country decision. I tend to find industry likes, I'm on a committee that helps countries do either. But we like it to be product group specific, so it promotes reformulation. Then you can see the number of products that cut the sodium. Well, this is not. Here's the sodium there. The processed meats, it was amazing the number that really cut to be healthy. And it was amazing the same in the soups. Just as two categories that are really high sodium products. So what Chile has done, the Latin American countries tend to are going for the negative logo. They've got about 55 to 60% of the foods are going to have the negative logo on them, because that's about what percentage of our foods are unhealthy beverages and junk foods, and not the percentage of the market share, but the percentage of the product. Those, they put the negative logo on, high in sodium, high in added sugar, high in unsaturated fats, too much energy density, and then they ban the marketing for children in the first year. So the first year, it's a fairly complete law that covers most media, where 20% of the zero, they have an age group, 0 to 14, I think, if I remember correctly. That 0 to 14, I'm evaluating it, I should memorize it, but I got it. So that age group cannot see, if it's 20% more watching any TV program, listening to any radio program, at any sporting event, there cannot be anything there that they see, or any movie that has those negative foods on them. A year later, 6 a.m. to 10 p.m., nothing with those negative logos on it can be seen by anybody between those hours in the country. Now, we find that those kids in Chile, the very high income ones, they go on Facebook. They find the stuff from other countries. Nothing you can do about those kinds of ads. And that's the only gap. So we've got a cohort of 4-year-olds and a cohort of 12-year-olds we're following to understand that issue. But there's very little you can do. You can monitor what goes on the internet very easily, but you can't stop it if it comes from outside your country. So that tends to be the system. So in summary, we're really facing a food supply with increasingly sugars added to everything. It's quite surprising and remarkable how much sugar is added in food as well as beverages. We've got way too much refined carbohydrates in our packaged and processed foods, and we have to deal with that. We have the caloric sweeteners, and we have the deep fried food. Your country, a falafel country, that's a particularly complex issue for you. Taxes work. Taxes work on the wrong kinds of foods. Taxes work and it's a very difficult issue for countries. But now, I think by the end of the year, I'll have 7 to 10 countries with taxes. So of a bigger nature than Mexico's, because countries are desperate to deal with this health problem. Marketing, Chile's the first to move to total marketing, away from children's marketing, into the total ban. We'll learn a lot from that. But in general, in Scandinavia, where they've had, in the UK and others, don't believe the evidence. In the UK, they find that the kids see the other TV and the dollars of marketing haven't gone down. It's just shifted to other TV shows. And there are lots of papers on that. And it's the same with all the voluntary marketing programs. Not a single one have we found has been effective and has really done what they said, let alone really mattered. This is a very complex area, but clearly it's part of and combining it with front of the package profiling is generally the best way, because then you have a science-created system. Generally, when countries do it, they have a scientific group that defines it and creates a draft system. They get industry comments, they then take the good ones from those and don't some of the others, and you come up with a system, and you have to change it every 2 to 4 years, because we find industry formulation can move very quickly. The sodium reductions across the globe are huge, and you can then push it further if you need to, and depending on your country's health. But we're really at an early stage. So what would I say for Israel? I would say a small tax won't be enough. Your consumption of soft drinks and juices are too small. You need a bigger tax, really, if you want to impact and get a serious health impact. If you have a 20% tax, you'll get an impact. It'll be significant, but it'll take 5 or 8 years before you see effects on diabetes and obesity. Sure. And it'll just take a cumulative. The distribution will shift, though. And the shift will be bigger, like we were showing in one paper coming out in Mexico. It'll be bigger on high consumers. And that's the group of adolescents that we really want to impact. So it's not bad. Marketing bans are critical. I really feel, from my experiences, linking them with front of the package profiling really works best. So you reinforce both sides in the retail sector and what they see, so that it just helps. I think you've got to have it, whatever you do on front of the package profiling has to be food group specific, so that you can push reformulation. We want to help consumers, and we want to deal with reformulation at the same time. Industry can change, and they are. They're cutting their sugars, they're cutting their sodium and their fats. When you have this kind of a when you have a logo, they do it. So I honestly think it's part of a trilogy of things you do, but it won't by itself, without marketing, be enough. You'll get a small amount of reformulation, but you may not. We have not yet found any of the profiling systems that have changed purchases. We have 2 studies going on in Denmark and the Netherlands, and we'll see what they show. But we haven't before now had any impact on purchase study. So all the studies have been on reformulation, and they've all been like the Dutch one, on the positive logo. So we haven't seen others. Some of the systems are on all foods and all beverages, and it really is hard to push reformulation. The traffic lights on the total diet, and they haven't seen, the reformulation's been the British push on sodium only. Haven't seen the sugar kind of pushes. We've seen the UK shift to diet beverages because of all the discussion on soft drinks among the better educated and middle income, but that's a different issue. It's not because of the traffic lights. So and that's kind of, but I'm really open to lots of questions. I've been doing this now, working with countries for the last half-dozen years, and it's an increasing part of my life, so.
Okay.
Questions, or come on industry, hit me. I've been hit lots.
A non-industrial representative wants to ask something. Yes.
Few questions. Do you believe truly that reformulation really have a big impact on diabetes and so on?
No.
When we're talking, you're working with Brazil too.
Yeah.
And they came out with a great recommendations. So when they say, yes,
I don't
eat
think
mostly unprocessed food,
Yeah.
it doesn't.
Yeah, I don't think reformulation without marketing controls is I don't think it's enough. In fact, I have a grant of $10 million evaluation fund to work with low and middle income countries. I'm not going to evaluate any country that has just an FOP, front of the label profiling. If they have marketing with it, we're working with them, because then I think there's a potential for an impact. But alone, I think it's minor reformulation. We don't know the purchase effects yet. I think it won't be enough. I think if a country like South Africa, where they put legal restrictions on sodium, they're going to see cuts, and they put it on serious products that they know people are buying. That's different, but I don't think alone it will do it.
When you say serious cuts on the sodium legally, how does that fit in with the trade restrictions or not wanting to create barriers to trade?
It was a regulation for all products of this category in the country. This is how much you had to reduce sodium. They put sodium levels and they gradually.
And what about
That create
imported
trade
products?
barriers?
No, it doesn't create a trade barrier because it's done on both domestic and imported products equally.
As
It's
long
just
as
like
you
a
don't
tax.
prefer your local product, it's not
Yeah.
a trade
Yeah,
barrier.
that's the problem. You have to treat them both equally. So Kerala, India, which is trying to put a tax on McDonald's and pizza and hamburgers, which are mainly from certain companies,
Right.
it's going to be
Kerala?
gone.
In Kerala?
Yeah, it's going to go. It'll be taken to court and gone in minutes because it's discriminatory. It's not all fast food of a certain category.
Professor Shopkin, if I may ask, can you elaborate on the time frame in terms of years it takes to make the reformulation worldwide?
I think if having talked to senior nutrition scientists from the global food companies, we now have the technology, at least in the sodium area and in the sugar area, to do an awful lot of reformulation quickly if we want to. For the domestic companies, it's a very big issue for the small ones. And in the case of Thailand, we're working out something where the big companies are trying to work with small companies to help them or provide them with salts and salt substitutes and products. Because they're different, like sodium, for example, there are many different, it has a salty issue, it has a baking component, there are many functions. So the big global companies have worked out for each of the functions ways to replace the sodium. In some cases, it provides some benefit. We may say we like to get our potassium from fruit, but we don't get enough in most of our countries. So they're adding some potassium to replace some of the sodium in the salt. But in general, the technologies exist for sodium and for sugar. And they're moving quickly on the sugar because it's been such an uproar issue for the last 5 or 8 years. They've seen it coming. In the area of the fats, we've had a long history with that, and companies know how to make healthier fats. We can get rid of we've got rid of trans fats in how little time? Because companies were working 5 years ahead as the literature started to build. It's really kind of, the question is now, given that you have all this technology, how much can we rely on that to give us what we need to eat healthy, or what do we need to push? And it's a very complex question. Huge debate. There are countries saying we only need real foods and beverages, and that if you sell water, great, but if you want to sell soft drinks, we don't. So this is a big, complex debate that we haven't dealt with yet. The real food question versus the processing, and it. But aside from that, I think reformulation, I think you have the technology. As a global industry, I think the small companies need help. And only Thailand's the first country with its profiling that's working out arrangements where the Unilevers, the Danones, the mega companies that have the technology, the Nestle, they're getting them to work with smaller local producers. That's a critical element in the end, because the local producers don't have the technology.
Another question, if you may. In Israel, we have nearly 20% nutrition insecurity. When you're talking about taxing, you're not really helping. I mean, it's okay. And in Israel, the sugary beverages, relatively, the prices are a little bit high, but compared to the United States. But how do we solve this problem? I mean, if you put taxes, you know that in Israel, the prices of fruit and vegetables raised about 65% in the last 5 years. And people cannot afford it, yes?
That's right.
So, first of all, when you tax, why do not obligate this money to subsidize it?
It
yes?
can. And that's experiments going on in several countries, using stamps, using cards they can use at retailers. If they buy certain kind of products, they get them at very low cost. In fact, there's one insurance company out of South Africa that's in the UK, US, China, Singapore, that has that people have a card that's for that
Yes.
several retailers, and they get a discount if they buy healthy foods.
Yes.
So you can do that, and it's a smart way to go, and it's one of the ways to sell your tax. So I'm very aware of that. The other thing is about your food insecure population. Look what those infants are being weaned on. And the kids, unfortunately, are being weaned on junk food and soft drinks and fruit juice. So that food insecurity and the obesity and the NCD problem are coming together.
Exactly.
And so we
So
need...
when we offer a suggestion, it should be a holistic
Right,
one.
that's right. But I think we have to really think about that first 1,000-day population seriously, particularly for our lower income populations where the overweight is very high and the gestational weight gain is very high and the infants are fed very poorly. So I completely agree with you. And I spent the first 25, 30 years of my life working on world and U.S. hunger.
Yes, yes, yes.
Including in our country, we had kwashiorkor marasmus. So it's
We're
not a...
following you, you know.
Yeah, so I completely agree.
Wouldn't you say that although many of the things you suggested, part of them are still evaluating? We know some successes, we know some question marks about the success of succeeding that. But wouldn't you say that if you have even small successes in all kind of like for what you do in schools, and you said it's only a little part, that all this multiple approaches, that's the way that we should approach the problem, the huge problem, like you said, the cultural change, that we want to change this culture.
Yeah, no, you must do schools.
many things
Right.
in all kind of
Absolutely, we must do schools and hospitals that the government controls. It's a necessity.
Yeah.
It's just like you dealt with smoking quickly that way. I mean, we start with the public institutions, we have to do that, but we must go beyond that.
Yeah, of course
It
we have
won't
to
be
go down,
enough.
but it has to be all together.
Absolutely.
Everything has to be on the same umbrella of doing all these multiple approaches to really have this changing, to see the change afterwards.
Completely. And actually, yes, very much. And I'm working in a program with a bunch of countries where we're really focused on those four things: the schools and public health institutions, the marketing, the front of the package profiling, and the tax. And they're all part of the first array. The harder stuff that we really haven't got countries working on seriously enough yet is food service. And again, it's a growing part of our diets, but that's the big unknown. It's only experimental right now.
And do you have where, for example, we know that taxes, like what the taxes you said, there are all kind of taxes, and each country has different way of taxing products and things. For example, in Israel, you pay more tax, for vegetables and healthy food, and less tax for non-healthy food in organization and in organization.
I don't think so.
I don't think
No. What I mean, you have כל הנושא של קיזוז מס.
Oh, okay. Like tax credits.
The tax credits.
Right.
So for organizations and public.
I think that it's already changed.
We did a change. We did a change. Is this fact?
Sure.
But it has a potential to make even a greater change, because still in Israel, it's like you can have to pay less tax if you bring your visitors in this kind of format. Cookies.
Right, it's a very critical issue, and we're talking about relative prices, and we have, depending on the system, removing subsidies, subsidies and tax credits is the same thing as taxing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's all about changing the relative prices.
Exactly.
But sometimes, psychologically, when people see an increase in price, it matters more. And that's what we've also found in a number of work efforts. But again, it all comes back to we got to find a way to keep deal with the food insecurity while we deal with the rest of the problem, because it's all together.
that's why we have to suggest the healthy food to be cheaper.
Yeah.
As well
And-
as we
and-
don't
and as
want
I
the
said,
expensive
We built such a global food system, your country included, that made unhealthy food much cheaper. So it's going to take decades
Yeah.
to get to the world you're talking about. In my country, the price, we still see relative prices of sweets and oils and sugars and so forth, very low increases. And we see fruits and just, it's no different than yours. Healthy foods are not subsidized. The production was never really, we didn't create the infrastructure in the way we did for produce and vegetables that we did for other things. And we're paying the cost.
Okay.
You mentioned potassium as one of the methods to replace sodium. What is your opinion about it?
Say that again, excuse me.
You mentioned potassium as one of the methods.
It depends on the problem in the country. In a country like China, where added salt is and salt in soy sauce and salt in MSG is such a huge issue, and you have an average of 8 grams, huge in consumption of the problem.
Here's 9.5.
Yeah, so then you're up there too. The use of potassium salt is a very critical thing. The problem is finding some that are acceptable to your population taste-wise. But some countries, in China, they have it. We're fighting a battle now with the Salt Authority makes money by charging more for that than they do for the regular salt. The government's working to try to change the pricing so the potassium salts are, higher potassium, lower sodium salts are cheaper. But getting one that fits the cultures is the critical thing. And the technology is there to do it. And salt substitutes can be sold and if they're cheaper and there's an education program, they are critical, especially because potassium has another effect on hypertension along with the sodium in our whole system. So we need both.
But we prefer potassium for natural resources.
Yeah, so you get your salt from the sea. Yeah, I mean, sea.
No, I mean by the potassium.
Yeah.
From the kosher meat.
Like the fruits and vegetables.
But we don't need enough.
Yeah.
So I think it's part of the issue, and a lot of countries are working with it. And the Asian countries are, at least the East Asian countries are seriously working to find and to replace salt when they can with the potassium. But I don't know, I mean, Israel, I'm not aware of. I don't know how much of the salt comes from salt added in cooking and how much comes.
75% from processed.
So you're like the Asian countries. Then, if it comes that way, you really need to think about. If that, you got a level that high.
No, it's processed foods.
75%
processed foods, not in cooking. Processed.
75% of processed food. Not
Then if it's that high in processed, that's where the issue is.
Yes.
It's not going to be the salt itself. But in Asia, it's the opposite. In Japan, Korea, China, it's 75-80% from salt added.
But then in the processed food, it will be a good idea to use it.
Well, no. The processed foods are high, and we're working to get them reformulated too. But they're growing.
As part of the reformulation, to use the potassium as one of the.
Right, it's one of the options for some companies, for some components, but not. It will change it some. Sodium will go down more than potassium will increase. You'll find, because they have other substitutes for other functions. They won't tell me all their secrets. They just talk to me in general.
But it's one of them.
Yes, absolutely important. And especially if you have that high a salt intake in your country, you really have a big issue. And look, Jews are really, hypertension's a critical thing in our Ashkenazi backgrounds. So it's
Well, not all Ashkenazim.
Yeah, it's not. It's only
We're
a part of our
changing the population
country.
now.
Yeah, we're right. We're increasingly smaller.
in Israel.
Yes, we're getting smaller proportions, but we still. And diabetes is more a problem than some of the other Sephardic and.
So there is a balance.
Yeah, so
One
there's
of the factors that, as you know,
but both have to be dealt with. Both have.
factors overall, meat which is much saltier, and a lot of other factors in the kosher process, whether you're Sari, Ashkenazi, whatever, most of the meat we're buying is higher in sodium than, unkosher meat.
It's really amazing.
That is a contributor, and we're actually working with some of the poultry.
Yeah, I heard about that. The salted. Yes, no, I understand that from my grandfather was a kosher butcher.
עוד שאלות? Are you optimistic globally?
No, it's good. We got a long battle ahead of us. Some countries will succeed, and I'm hoping others will follow. I see more countries trying to do something now than 2 years. So many more. That yes, I'm optimistic. Well, that we're going in, but we got a long battle. As a globe, we're fighting a losing battle against diabetes. We're either going to evolve into someone who's diabetic and survives, or unless we do more. And in your country, I mean, you're going to see it. The diabetes is going to come in a decade. That's what we're seeing when we study cohorts and we look at the effects. Mm-hmm. It's not right now. It's the enormous problem. We're going to find it in all the populations in the world. That cohort effect is huge. The younger age groups are eating so poorly, so that we have to start now. We really have to start quickly.
Okay, so thank you very much.
My pleasure.
אני רוצה קצת להכניס אתכם לעולם של התעשייה הישראלית שלאחר משבר 2011. למעשה המשבר התחיל קצת קודם, המשבר הכלכלי העולמי של 2008-2009, התעשייה הישראלית הייתה חלק מהתעשייה העולמית, חלק מהירידה בביקושים, התחילה תהליכים של התייעלות, ואז הגיע משבר יוקר המחיה, כאשר לגישתנו הממשלה מהר מאוד הסיטה את זה ממשבר הדיור למשבר הקוטג', והתעשייה הישראלית, בעיקר תעשיית המזון אבל לא רק, ספגה אש שתעשייה בעולם לא ספגה. כלומר, התעשייה הישראלית מעבר לעובדה שפועלת במשק שהוא בעייתי מבחינה אובייקטיבית, מבחינת הקלות תעשיית העסקים, מבחינת הריחוק מחומרי הגלם ושווקי היעד, נכנסה ללחץ של מחאת יוקר המחיה, ומאז התעשייה הזאת מצויה תחת זכוכית מגדלת מאוד גדולה, שהלחץ הוא גם בעניין של הפחתת מחירים וגם לחצים נוספים כתוצאה מתקלות כאלה ואחרות, שמן הסתם קיימות בכל תעשייה. כלומר, אם לצורך העניין משבר יונילבר האחרון היה קורה במוצר קורנפלקס מיובא, סביר להניח שלא היינו נחשפים לו ברמות כל כך גבוהות כפי שנחשפה התעשייה הישראלית. ברקע הזה, במציאות הזאת, בעולם הזה, מגיעה התעשייה לנושא של שינוי הרגולציה, או הבחינה של שינוי הרגולציה על המזון. ופה אנחנו א' שמחים כמובן שהוועדה החליטה, משה החליט לשתף אותנו בוועדה, גליה היא חברה, וב' כמובן שאנחנו, התעשייה עצמה מוכנה לעשות את שיתוף הפעולה בכל הרמות שידרש, ועם זאת יש דגשים שחשובים לתעשייה הישראלית, כי אני מניח שהמטרה של כולנו היא גם לייצר הרגלי צריכה של מזון בריא יותר, אבל גם לא לפגוע בתעשייה הישראלית בהשוואה למתחרות שלה בעולם, להבטיח כאן תעשיית מזון תחרותית, חדשנית, וכזו שתוכל להמשיך ולספק את המזון באופן עצמאי לישראל. ובהקשר הזה יש לנו מספר דגשים שאנחנו חושבים שהוועדה באמת צריכה לשים עליהם את הדגש, גם כדי שהתהליך הזה יצליח, וגם כדי שהתעשייה תוכל להמשיך ולשמור על כושר התחרות שלה, ולהמשיך לפעול בישראל. יש פה 4 דגשים, האחד הוא הדרגתיות, השני הוא ניסיון בינלאומי. אני חושב שהמצגת של פרופסור פופקין עזרה לנו מאוד. נושא של עלות תועלת, זה משהו חדש לישראל, נכנס רק ב-2015, בריאה. אם אתם לא מכירים, עברה החלטת ממשלה 2218, שהמטרה שלה בעצם בדיקת כל רגולציה חדשה לפני שהיא מוטמעת בשטח, כדי לבדוק משמעויות על המשק ולבדוק משמעויות על הצמיחה וכדומה. אני אגע בזה בקלות. והנושא של מחויבות ממשלתית לתהליך, כדי שנוכל באמת להוביל את התהליך הזה על פי לוח זמנים מוגדר מראש, ארוך ככל הניתן, ובאמת להביא את התהליך הזה כדי שיהיה אפקטיבי. עכשיו, מה שאני למדתי בעיקר מהשעה וחצי האחרונות, זה העולם נמצא בשלבים מאוד מאוד מוקדמים, בנושא של רגולציית מזון. המחקרים הם לא חד משמעיים, לנו יש מחקרים אחרים שקצת סותרים את מה שנאמר פה, אני אתייחס לזה ממש על קצה המזלג. אבל בעולם כזה שבו שאנחנו עדיין נמצאים בצעדים הראשונים, צריך לנקוט במשנה זהירות. לפני שהם מציעים צעדים דרמטיים כמו הצעד שראיתי פה שמומלץ לישראל להעלות את המס על מזון ממותק או על משקאות ממותקים ב-30%, אני חושב שזה לא משהו שאנחנו יודעים לחיות איתו. ונתחיל. הדבר החשוב ביותר לדעתנו זה באמת ללמוד מהניסיון. הניסיון, כפי שאמרתי, הוא אמנם דל, אבל עדיין יש מדינות שנוקטות בצעדים כאלה ואחרים, ואני חושב שאנחנו לא צריכים לאמץ צעדים שלא אומצו בישראל. כלומר, מס של 30%, אני לא ראיתי שהוא אומץ באיזושהי מדינה בעולם, ואני לא חושב שדווקא ישראל צריכה להיות הראשונה שמאמצת אותו, או מס בכלל לגישתנו. אנחנו חושבים שהקידום אורח מזון בריא הוא משהו שנבדק על ידי דוחות שגם הוגשו לוועדה, וצריך להסתמך על כל הידע שנאגר ולהבין גם את התרבות הישראלית המיוחדת שבתוכה אנחנו פועלים כדי לעשות התאמות של הרגולציה לתרבות הזאת. אני אגיד עוד מילה אחת לגבי התעשייה. התעשייה פועלת בעצם על אינטרוול, על מתח כזה שבין הרצון כמובן להביא למוצר הטוב ביותר מבחינתה שימכר הכי הרבה, ובין הרצון, מחיר הכי הרבה זה כמובן תלוי טעם של הצרכנים, ובין הרצון באמת להיצמד למוצרים בריאים, מוצרים שבאמת בסופו של דבר ישרתו את התעשייה לטווח ארוך, ועל המתח הזה אנחנו משחקים. כלומר, תהליכים שלצורך העניין יחייבו שינוי טעם מהיר מדי, ויביאו להפחתת צריכה של המוצר הספציפי הזה, לא ישרתו לא את הצורך שלנו כוועדה ולא את הצורך של התעשייה. בכל מה שקשור למיסוי, אני חושב שהאמירה שנאמרה פה ש-taxes work היא לא מספיק מושתתת על מחקרים מהימנים. כי מה שאנחנו בדקנו, למשל במקרה של מקסיקו, שזה המקרה הקלאסי של מיסוי, הייתה ירידה אומנם קלה בצריכת המשקאות, אבל שוב זה תלוי מחקר. לצורך העניין, אם אנחנו מסתכלים על הנתונים האובייקטיביים ובודקים כמה צרכה כל נפש במקסיקו ב5 השנים האחרונות, לפני המס ואחרי המס, זה פחות או יותר נשאר אותו דבר, זה 160, 161 ו-162 ליטר לנפש לשנה, והחיסכון הוא 2 עד 6 קלוריות בשנה. כלומר, זה כל מה שהמס הזה עשה, הפחית את הגזר הזה שאכלתי קודם, 2 עד 6 קלוריות, ועם זה אף אחד לא מתווכח, עם 2 עד 6 קלוריות. מתווכחים קצת לגבי האם זה הביא להפחתה כזאת או הביא להפחתה אחרת, אבל אלה המחקרים שיש לנו, אנחנו עשינו מחקר גם השוואתי בינלאומי, אנחנו נגיש אותו לוועדה. זה מה שהמס הזה עשה. זה מה שהמס הזה עשה. אם אפשר שאלות בסוף.
מה שחשוב רק להגיד זה שהתכולה הקלורית זה לא הדבר היחיד, אלא גם ההרכב התזונתי של מה שאנשים אוכלים.
אבל אני לא חושב שאף מחקר בדק את ההרכב התזונתי הזה.
הם כן בדקו את זה, מה שהוא הראה לך קודם.
את ההשפעה על הבריאות?
כן, הם הראה לך שהם העלו את הצריכה של מזון בריא והורידו את הצריכה של מזון לא בריא, ולכן הסך הכל קלוריות הוא לא מדד נכון להראות.
לא, אנחנו מדברים רק על הירידה בצריכה של המשקאות שחסכה 2-6 קלוריות, לא בצריכה הכוללת.
זה לא הנתונים שיש לנו.
אוקיי.
המומחים פשוט יושב פה, שזה ממקסיקו, רק לציין.
לא, אבל יש עוד מומחים.
בסדר.
עם כל הערכה למומחה, יש מומחים נוספים שבדקו את זה, ובהם ממשלת מקסיקו, משרד הבריאות של מקסיקו. נכון, משרד הבריאות של מקסיקו שבדק את זה והראה את הנתונים.
אני מציעה שלגבי מקסיקו, אחרי זה תציג את זה באנגלית, שהוא יוכל לענות לך, כי הוא באמת יצא ממשלת מקסיקו.
גלי, תציג את זה במצגת שלך. כך גם לגבי מקומות נוספים בעולם. בדנמרק, כשהיה מס על שומן רווי, הוא בוטל אחרי שנה וקצת אחרי שהטילו אותו, מאחר והובהר שהמס לא אפקטיבי. בפינלנד קיים מס ממתקים, שהוא חל על שורה רחבה של דברי מתיקה. המטרה של המס הזאת הייתה פיסקלית לחלוטין, תוספת הכנסות למדינה, ובסופו של דבר זה הביא לעלייה בצריכה של תחליפים שאינם ממוסים, כך שמס יכול להיות טריקי, כלומר כשמטילים מס לא יודעים לאן זה מתפתח, ואם ראיתם את התוצאות של המיסוי הירוק שהטילו על כלי רכב לפני 5 שנים, חלק אמרו שזה הפחית את הרכישה של מכוניות מזוהמות, אבל העלה את הזיהום האוויר הכללי, כי אנשים פשוט קנו יותר מכוניות זולות. ולכן מס יכול להיות טריקי, ולכן צריך לבדוק את המשמעויות שלו. כמובן שאנחנו מתנגדים לגמרי לנושא של הטלת מס. הנושא של בריאה, זה משהו שהוועדה לדעתי צריכה לתת אליו את הדעת כבר בשלבים בכל שלב, כי בסופו של דבר המלצות הוועדה הזאת כנראה יגיעו לבדיקה של השפעות הרגולציה על המשק, והשפעות דרמטיות מדי מן הסתם יביאו לציון בריאה נמוך יותר. כאן יש איזושהי השוואה לגבי צעדים שנעשו בעולם מבחינת ההשפעה שלהם, ואתם יכולים לראות שלמעשה הצעדים האפקטיביים ביותר זה ה-Workplace Wellness צעד שגם התעשייה הישראלית תמצא כמובן במסגרת, איך זה נקרא?
אפשרי בריא בעבודה.
אפשרי בריא בעבודה.
זה לא, אבל בואו נוריד את זה. כל הצעדים, אנחנו כרגע מדברים על תעשיית המזון, ועל רגולציה על תעשיית המזון. אנחנו לא מדברים על בתי ספר, ולא על חינוך, ולא על פעילות גופנית, ולא על קידום בריאות במקומות עבודה. אנחנו מדברים, לא.
עדיין כדי לראות את התמונה הכללית.
חשוב למקד את זה. אנחנו פה דנים באיך אנחנו, מה הצעדים שאנחנו הולכים לעשות בתעשיית המזון, כדי שבסוף התוצרים שמייצר תהיו יותר בריאים.
בגלל זה אנחנו מציינים את הסרג'רי, שזה שם בכלל.
אני אומר, בואו נתמקד בדברים האלה, יש עוד זירות שצריך לעבוד בהן, אף אחד לא אומר שלא, אבל אנחנו כרגע
אז דרך אגב, אתם יכולים לראות, דיברנו על הטקס, ואיכשהו תפס תשומת לב, אתם יכולים לראות את הציון שקיבל הטקס בהשפעה שלי. שקף הבא. חשוב להדגיש שכל הצעדים שאנחנו בעצם, שאתם תמליצו בסופו של דבר להשית על התעשייה המקומית, צריך לוודא שבעצם התעשייה המקומית לא תופלה לרעה. כפי שקורה בחלק גדול מההחלטות ממשלה שהתקבלו לאחרונה במטרה לעודד יבוא כדי לעודד תחרות במשק. אנחנו חושבים שרגולציה שחלה על התעשייה המקומית זו רגולציה שצריכה להיות מחייבת כמובן ביבוא וביבוא מקביל. כמובן שלא ייתכן שמוצר שיוצר בישראל יחולו עליו כל החלטות הרגולציה של הוועדה, ועוד מוצר שיובא באופן מקביל מחו"ל יהיה פטור מכך, וכמובן שצריך לתת על זה את הדעת. כל מה שקשור להסרת חסמי תקינה ורגולציה שקיימים היום, גליה תרחיב על זה, זה כמובן חלק ממה שאנחנו חושבים שהוועדה צריכה להמליץ. אנחנו חושבים שהשינוי בסופו של דבר יכול גם להועיל לתעשייה, כלומר שינויים של מעבר לתעשייה בריאה מן הסתם מגלמים בתוכם כל מיני אפשרויות, בין השאר להפוך לתחרותי יותר, חדשני יותר, פותח אפשרויות בפני מפעלים קטנים ובינוניים. עם זאת צריך לזכור שבאמת זה תהליכים יקרים וארוכים, ובסופו של דבר צריך ללכת עקב בצד אגודל כדי להביא להצלחה של התהליכים האלה. כפי שאמרתי בתחילה, אנחנו חושבים שהתעשייה בעצם מחויבת לתהליך הזה, מן הסתם מתוקף האחריות שלה גם כלפי הצרכנים, ואנחנו חושבים שהעבודה ביחד, כלומר העבודה של כל הגורמים ביחד, גם אם זה גורמים קצת בסתירה למה שאמרת, צריך לראות את התמונה הכוללת, כלומר תהליכים שיחייבו רק את התעשייה לעשות איזשהו שינוי רגולטורי כזה או אחר, מן הסתם לא יעבדו, וצריך לבחון את התהליכים הרגולטוריים האלה בהקשר של תוכנית כוללת, ומחויבות של כל הגופים, כולל הממשלה, לתהליך הזה. בסופו של דבר אנחנו משוכנעים, כפי שאמרתי, שאנחנו צריכים הירתמות כללית של כולם, כולל אנחנו. אנחנו מדברים על מהלך שצריך לכלול גם את הפן הבריאותי, אבל גם את הפן החינוכי והרפואי, ושינוי של הרגלים שהם לא רק הרגלי תזונה, אלא הרגלים בכלל של הרגלי התנהגות. אנחנו חושבים שהצעד האפקטיבי ביותר שיכול להיעשות זה בסופו של דבר לחנך את הצרכן. כי בסופו של דבר תעשיין מספק את צרכיו של הצרכן. ויש כאן מחלוקת האם התעשייה הרגילה את הצרכן לצרוך טעמים מתוקים או מלוחים יותר, או אם הצרכן עצמו בסופו של דבר, אין מחלוקת כזאת? אין מחלוקת. אני חושב שלגישתנו יש. מתי יתרגל הצרכן לטעם המתוק? מתי יתרגל הצרכן לטעם המתוק והמלוח, והאם זה באמת משהו שהתעשייה עשתה? אני רוצה להגיד עוד מילה לגבי כל מה שקשור לצריכת מזון בריא. הממשלה עצמה גורמת בהחלטות שלה לעיקור מוצרי המזון הבריא. בין אם זה עיקור המים, בין אם זה היטלים על עובדים במוצרי חקלאות, בין אם זה מיסים כאלה ואחרים. ובסופו של דבר ההשפעה על מחירי המזון בישראל היא בעיקר השפעה ממשלתית, גם על המזון התעשייתי המעובד וגם על המזון הטרי. וצריך לזכור שאם אנחנו רוצים להשתמש במקטע של המחירים להשפעה על הרגלי צריכה, אפשר להשתמש גם על הצד ההפוך, כלומר לא לייקר את המוצרים שלגישתנו צריך להטיל עליהם מס, אלא להוזיל את המוצרים שבסופו של דבר הם צריכים להיות בריאים יותר. וכמי שעובד גם עם התאחדות האיכרים ועם התאחדויות החקלאים, אנחנו יודעים שניתן לנקוט במספר צעדים כדי להוזיל בצורה משמעותית את מה שיש פה על השולחן, ויכול להיות שהוועדה יכולה להתייחס גם לזה. תודה.
אני רוצה להמשיך ולהתייחס לנושאים הספציפיים שהוועדה אמונה ודנה בהם מתחילת עבודתה. נמצאים פה גם אנשי תעשייה שאני שמחה שהצטרפו ויוכלו לסייע בשאלות והבהרות. אנחנו מתייחסים לשלושה נושאים עיקריים, לסימון מוצרים, לנושא הרפורמולציות, להגבלת פרסום על ילדים, ורוצים לציין גם את הפעילויות מעבר שאנחנו לוקחים על עצמנו לעשות בהמשך. מבחינת סימון בחזית האריזה, גם שמענו את פרופסור פופקין, גם שמענו בשבוע שעבר את רשות המיסים, ובעיקר אנחנו יכולים לראות כאן על המפה שיש הרבה מאוד דרכי סימון שונות, משונות, ואני חושבת שהקו המקשר בין כולם זה שעוד אף אחת לא הוכחה כמשפיעה על מרכיב ההשמנה, ועוד אין שיטה אחת שאנחנו יכולים לקחת רק אותה, אנחנו יכולים לבחור את הטוב ביותר או את מה שיש בו הכי הרבה ניסיון בעולם. אנחנו מחלקים את השיטות לשתי שיטות עיקריות. לשיטה האובייקטיבית שמדברת, התייחסו אליה גם כ-GDA, אנחנו מתייחסים יותר למה שידוע כ-RI, שיטה שהיא שקופה, שהיא משקפת את הרכיבים שיש בתוך המוצר, היא מתייחסת לשומן, לנטרן, לסוכר, ומעבר לזה מפרטת גם את כמה זה האחוז מתוך הצריכה היומית המומלצת. אתם יכולים לראות את הדוגמה איך שהיא מופיעה. לשיטתנו מדובר בשיטה שקופה, בשיטה שהיישום שלה יכול להיעשות כיישום וולונטרי ואז הביצוע שלו הוא ביצוע מהיר, מאפשרת לצרכנים להשוות את המוצרים. בראייה שלנו למעשה נותנת לצרכנים חכות ולא דגים, נותנת את המידע, נותנת את האפשרות שגם מחר אם אני רואה מוצר אחר אז אני יודעת לנתח אותו, ובעיקר נותנת את השוני בין בני האדם, כי כל אחד צריך להסתכל על רכיב אחר ולהתאים אותו למעשה לתזונה האישית שלו. גלי,
אני חייב לעצור אותך רגע. שאול אמסטרדמסקי, אני איימתי שאם המשרד הבריאות יטיל יותר מדי רגולציה לתעשייה, הרגולציה הזאת תיפול בצוות הממשלתי להפחתת הרגולציה? אני איימתי? מישהו שמע איום פה?
זה היה איום מרומז, כן.
זה היה איום מרומז.
זה היה איום מרומז שאמרת שזה עשוי לא לעמוד בסוף באותו...
באיזה אופן זה איום?
אם אתה קובע שאנחנו נגיע להחלטות והן עשויות לא לעמוד
בסטנדרט... לא, אני רוצה שתצטטו באופן מדויק את מה שנאמר כאן.
זה איום, כן,
אני רוצה שתצטטו באופן מדויק את מה שנאמר כאן. לא היה איום ולא היה צליל של איום.
אבל עדיין אני מחזקת את שאול כי זה היה סוג של איום.
לא היה שום איום. לא היה שום איום.
הכל מוחלט, זה
בסדר. זה סיפור מוטה של מה שנאמר פה. הכל מוקלט.
אבל אנחנו לא שולטים בתקשורת. בסדר, אנחנו לא שולטים בתקשורת, הדיון הזה פתוח לתקשורת והם מדווחים את מה שהם מדווחים. אתם אומרים את מה שאתם אומרים, אם אתה רוצה להבהיר משהו זה כמובן יתקבל בברכה. בואו נמשיך.
דבר נוסף, שאנחנו רואים שהשיטה הזאת יכולה לסחוף אחריה את התעשייה לרפורמולציות, כי אפשר לסמן מספר מאוד גדול של קטגוריות ולא להשאיר חלק מהקטגוריות בחוץ. השיטה השנייה שאנחנו גם רואים אותה היא השיטה הסוכמת, היא למעשה משתמשת בסמל, בניקוד, והיא מספקת מידע על בסיס נוסחה שמסכמת את הפרמטרים. אנחנו מכירים אותה בעולם ב-choices, אנחנו מכירים אותה בקיול במדינות הנורדיות, אנחנו מכירים אותה בישראל באפשרי בריא במהלך של הפחתת הנטרן. זה מאפשר לאתר בצורה מהירה את המזונות בפרמטרים, וכמו שאמרתי, למעשה זאת נוסחה משוקללת שמסמנים יחד איתה את המוצרים. גם היא יכולה להוות כתמריץ לתעשייה, לרפורמולציות על מנת לזכות בתו. מה שאנחנו כתעשייה מציעים, אנחנו מזכירים לי מתחילת הדיון שאנחנו בוועדת אסדרה ולא בוועדה וולונטרית. אז אנחנו רוצים להציע שכאסדרה אפשר לאמץ את השיטה הסוכמת גם לאורך הדיונים. אנחנו רואים למעשה שזה הקו, רוצים שיהיה משהו אחד וברור לצרכן מבחינת בריאות. על פי העקרונות שלנו חשוב לנו שהשיטה תהיה רוחבית, שהיא תכלול כמה שיותר קטגוריות ושהיא תהיה חיובית, וגם פה פרופסור פופקין חיזק ואמר את החשיבות לבוא מהמקום החיובי ולא מהמקום האדום של המלון. אני חושבת שגם כל אחד מכיר את זה בביתו שלו עם הילדים, שכשאומרים לא, 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 הרבה פעמים מקבלים את התשובה, את התוצאה ההפוכה, מאשר הם נותנים את החיזוק החיובי, ואז גם הרבה פעמים מקבלים את ההתנהגות הזאת. ולצד זה, לאפשר לנו לסמן באופן וולונטרי את השיטה האובייקטיבית. לצורך כך אנחנו זקוקים למעשה למשרד הבריאות. הצעדים שאנחנו נדרשים בסימון בשיטה האובייקטיבית הוא בטווח הקצר לאמץ לתקופת ביניים, רק לתקופת ביניים, את הרפרנס של אירופה, שהם רפרנס שקיימים היום, שמושתתים היום במדינות ה-EU, על מנת שאנחנו נוכל להתחיל לסמן. RI. כן, RI, כי הוא נותן את הרפרנס כלפי כמה שאתה אמור לאכול מהצריכה היומית.
זה ה-GDA שמשווה גם ל-RDA, לקצובה.
אבל אנשים מזמן להשנים את זה, זה לא...
אבל השאלה...
רגע, זה
בואו נשמע אותם. זה לא דיון, רגע, זה לא דיון. אני רק שאלה אינפורמטיבית. יש שם הבחנה בין ילדים למבוגרים?
לא. היום ב-RI זה על פי אישה מבוגרת. הרפרנס הוא לאישה מבוגרת.
זה בעולם מבוגר, אנחנו יכולים לעשות ילדים, זאת אומרת, אם המשרד יגיד שילדים צריך להיות הרפרנס.
אפשר לעשות את הרפרנס לילדים, אבל בעולם כרגע, אם רוצים לעשות את זה...
רק אינפורמטיבי, זה עוד יהיה לנו דיון ארוך על הנושא.
אוקיי, אבל אם רוצים לעשות משהו שקיים מחר בבוקר שאנחנו יכולים להתחיל ליישם אותו, אז זה הרפרנס שקיים בעולם, הוא קיים במדינות ה-EU, ואותו אפשר פשוט לאמץ בזמן שבישראל בונים את הרפרנס, כי גם הבנייה לוקחת זמן, ואז לאמץ אותו פה. ולצד זה את השיטה המסכמת, את התו, שנראה אולי כיותר ברור לקצר מועד, בעינינו למועד היותר רחוק צריך כן להעביר חינוך את הצרכנים, ושכן לצרכנים יהיה את המידע לבוא ולבדוק, ושוב, הצרכנים הם מאוד מאוד שונים, משהו טוב לאחד, לא טוב לשני, ועוד פעם, בהתייחס לקטגוריות רחבות ובהתייחס לפרמטרים חיוביים, לעצב תו ישראלי, וגם ללוות אותו בהסברה וחשיפה למעשה לצרכנים. אז מה שאנחנו למעשה באים ואומרים, תנו לנו מחר בבוקר להתחיל לסמן באופן וולונטרי. אנחנו יודעים שמדינת ישראל, תהליך של הסדרה הוא לא תהליך קצר, ולמעשה יהיה ווין ווין לכל הצדדים. מבחינת רפורמולציות, עברנו על זה בדיון הקודם והצגנו כבר את התהליכים שהתעשייה עשתה לאורך השנים האחרונות, את התהליכים שהתעשייה עושה ומתחייבת גם להמשיך ולעשות בעתיד. אני חושבת שגם הוועדה שמעה כבר מספיק מומחים שאומרים שהתהליך הזה צריך להיות הדרגתי, שלוקח זמן להתרגל. גם מנכ"ל המשרד ציין שמבינים שאנחנו צריכים באמת לעשות איזשהו תהליך הדרגתי, וגם שהוא יהיה ארוך טווח וישים, שלא התעשייה תתחיל לעשות את כל השינוי ועוד כמה זמן הדברים ישתנו, אלא באמת שתהיה מחויבות ארוכת זמן. הצעדים שמבחינתנו נדרשים לקידום הפחתות ורפורמולציות, זה למעשה לקבוע יעדים לאומיים להפחתות. זה משהו שאנחנו כתעשייה לא יכולים לעשות באופן גורף מטעמים של הממונה על ההגבלים העסקיים, אבל אנחנו בהחלט, כמו שהיה שיתוף פעולה בהפחתות בנטרן וביעדים של הנטרן, לאמץ את אותו מודל גם לסוכרים וגם לשומן וגם להמשך הנטרן. לצד זה הצגנו גם בסיור שהיינו טיפול בחסמי רגולציה, גם לפיתוח מוצרים חדשים. נתנו את הדוגמה גם של גבינה מלוכה, גם של הנקטרים, שהיינו בברמן, שמענו את הדוגמה של החלה, של התקנים, וגם רגולציה שנוכל לשפר את המוצרים הקיימים. זה גם דבר שאנחנו יכולים לאסוף מבחינת התקנים שצריך לטפל בהם, בשביל שבסיוע משרד הבריאות יהיה אפשר באמת לפתח ולשפר את המוצרים. בנוסף, מתן תמריצים, וגם זה משהו שציינו, בעיקר למפעלי מזון קטנים ובינוניים.
באיזה אופן, על איזה... זה משהו שאנחנו כן חושבים שנכון לעשות, דיברנו על זה קצת בינינו בהזדמנויות שונות. מה לדוגמה יעזור? דיברתם על מהנדסי מזון, שאנחנו נסייע להם, מה עוד חשבתם?
ליאור, אתה רוצה, במקרה נמצא איתנו
ראש המועצה למפעלים קטנים ובינוניים
של התאחדות התעשיינים, ליאור לוי.
שמי ליאור לוי, אני יושב ראש המועצה למפעלים קטנים ובינוניים בהתאחדות התעשיינים, ואני גם
וגם תעשיין?
אני גם תעשיין.
מזון.
אני תעשיין מזון בין השאר, דור שלישי, היצרן של סוכרזית. נוסד... לא, סוכרזית. נוסד עוד לפני קום המדינה על ידי הסבא. אבל העניין הוא לא העניין הפרטי שלי, כי סוכרזית תעשייה משיקה, תעשיית המזון. אני רוצה להתחבר למה שאמר פרופסור פופקין לגבי התעשייה והיכולת שלה, של התעשייה הקטנה ובינונית, להתמודד עם הכלים. הוא אמר את זה די מפורשות, הוא אמר על התעשייה הגדולה העולמית, יש אולי את הכלים לעשות רפורמציה, לתעשייה הקטנה והבינונית בכלל, שם הכלים קצת לוקים בחסר. ואני חושב שעיקר הבעיה נובעת בזה כשמנתחים את התעשייה הקטנה והבינונית בישראל בכלל ואת המזון בפרט, רואים שהתעשייה, רובה ככולה, התעשייה הקטנה, עוסקת המון בנושא של איכות שוטפת, עוסקת המון בהתאמה לרגולציה, אבל מתקשה לרוב ביצירת פתרונות חדשניים או בפיתוחים חדשים. ולכן עיקר הכלי, או הכלי העיקרי שאני חושב שצריך יהיה להעמיד לצורך ההסדרה בנושא הזה, הוא המון עבודה בנושא של המדען הראשי. המון תמיכה של המדען הראשי, תהליך שכבר התחיל למען האמת, אבל יידרשו עוד משאבים נוספים.
זה טרגטינג,
כדי להגיע
כן, אבל לא רק המדען הראשי של משרד הכלכלה, אז דיברנו באמת שיש שיתוף פעולה של המדען הראשי גם של משרד הבריאות. גם הפיתוח מוצרים, גם באמת בליווי על ידי מומחים קיימים, ללוות את המפעל. עוד משהו?
בעיקר מדען ראשי.
אוקיי, בסדר.
וקמפיין שיודד באמת את צריכת המוצרים שמטייבים אותם, שאנשים הבינו את הבנפיט שיוצא. מבחינת נושא של הגבלת פרסום לילדים, אז גם פה אנחנו יכולים לראות במפת העולם, זה לא מכוון שבאמת יהיה אפשר לקרוא, זה רחוק ואני יודעת, אבל מבחינת לראות את המיפוי העולמי, מה שבאדום זה ברגולציה, מה שבכחול זה בצעדים שנעשו בצורה וולונטרית, במעורבות של התעשייה, שיתוף פעולה גם עם משרדי הבריאות. אז אנחנו יכולים לראות שיש שוני מאוד גדול בין המקומות בעולם. יש מקומות שמדברים על הגבלת, על גילאים שונים. יש מקומות שעושים את שהחליטו על איסור פרסום על פי מודלים של רייטינג של תוכניות, על פי סיווג של תוכניות ילדים ולא תוכניות ילדים. אנחנו יכולים לראות שבאמת המגוון הוא מאוד רחב, וכל אחד מתייחס לקריטריונים בצורה שונה. העמדה שלנו זה מבחינת מה שאנחנו שוב יכולים לבוא ולתת פה כבר על השולחן, שתלוי אך ורק בנו. צריך להבין שנושא המדיות הוא נושא רחב, הוא לא הכל אנחנו יכולים בכלל לאחוז בו. אנחנו נגביל את ה-call of action ברשתות החברתיות מגיל 12 ואילך, וקוראים להתחיל הליך משותף, תחום בזמן, לא למריחת זמן של 5 חודשים, 6 חודשים, או ליצור אמנה, או ליצור הבנה מבחינת הגבלת פרסום לילדים. מאחר ואנחנו רואים שהקריטריונים הם מאוד שונים, אנחנו חושבים שיש לא מעט בעלי עניין שצריכים להיות סביב השולחן. אפשר לעשות תהליך גם אם פנו אלינו ממועצות נוער עירוניות של לשתף גם ילדים שנמצאים במועצות בבתי ספר. אנחנו חושבים שאפשר לעשות פה משהו של שיתוף ציבור ובעלי עניין שיכול להיות בו עוד פעם בנפיט וווין ווין לכולם.
אני שואל אבל אתכם,
כן.
למרות שאני אולי מנחש את התשובה, אני בכל זאת חושב שהיא לא ברורה מעליה. האם לא עדיף שמהלך כזה, בכל זאת מכיוון שיש הרבה מאוד שחקנים בזירה, יהיה מעוגן בעוגן רגולטורי, תקנות, חקיקה, משהו אחר, כי בסוף המהלכים הוולונטריים האלה, אנחנו רואים שיש להם לפעמים את הדליפות שלהם, נגיד את זה ככה.
הרבה מהמהלכים שנעשים בכלל, הם נעשים לפעמים שהם מתחילים בצורה וולונטרית, ובסופו של דבר הם מעוגנים בתקנות.
אני שואל אם עדיף לכם, דווקא כהתאחדות, מהמקום שלכם שאתם מסתכלים על כל השחקנים, שבסוף, כדי שלא יהיה פה מישהו שינסה דרך הפרה של האמנה להשיג נתח שוק, לעגן את המהלך הזה במשהו מחייב את כולם, אקט רגולטורי שמחייב את כולם.
אני אומרת שאני חושבת שלהגיע לאותו אקט, זאת אומרת, יש הרבה פרמטרים שצריך לשים אותם על השולחן ולנסות להגיע איתם על איזושהי הבנה. ויש כאן הרבה גורמים, גם עוד פעם גורמי היבוא והחברות הבינלאומיות, גם רשתות המזון המהיר, זאת אומרת שיש פה הרבה שחקנים שלמעשה צריכים להתאגד, גם הרשות השנייה, ולכן אנחנו, יכול להיות או לא יכול להיות, אפשר גם להגיד שתוך חצי שנה צריך להעמיד איזושהי הצעה, והיא תהיה בסיס לתקנות.
ככלל אנחנו מעדיפים ממונה על רגולציה, אבל העלית הנקודה שאנחנו צריכים.
גם בשביל העדכון שלה, תראה למשל אם אפשר להוסיף, סליחה, ה-EU-Pledge, אותה אמנה שבאירופה היצרנים הציעו. נדמה לי שהמקור שלה הוא ב-2006 או ב-2007. אם אתה מסתכל עליה היום, עכשיו היא עברה עדכון מאוד גדול. נגיד, קח אותה לפני שנה, שנתיים. אין בה רשתות חברתיות, אין בה דברים כאלה. עכשיו, מי כמוך יודע שההליכים של חקיקה וההליכים שלוקחים הרבה זמן. זאת אומרת, אנחנו שוב נמצא את עצמנו במצב שבו המדיות מתפתחות, השיטות פרסום משתנות וכאלה דברים. תמיד אמנה מבחינת הצורך בעדכון שלה, מבחינת ההתאמה שלה לחיים, זאת אומרת, היא הרבה יותר נכונה, כי היא לא דורשת הליך עכשיו של ללכת לכנסת ולהתעכב עם תהליכים כאלה. אבל אין ספק שאתם תצטרכו לבחון לאורך זמן כמה באמת מהשוק מציית לזה. זאת אומרת, אחרי שנבנה איזשהו מנגנון שמסוכם ומקולבל על כולם. ואני מניחה שגליה יושבת פה כיצרנים, לא כיבואנים, לא כבעלי מסעדות, מסללות, כאלה דברים. זאת אומרת, אני מניחה שהאינטרס שלכם הוא לא שאנחנו נגביל את עצמנו בפרסום לילדים, אבל פיצות או המבורגרים או דוכני נקניקיות לא יגבילו את עצמם. לכן זה צריך להיות משהו הרבה יותר רחב, ומה שאנחנו יכולים לקחת על עצמנו הוא רק באותו מזון ארוז מראש, כאילו.
אני יכולה לשאול שאלה? שמה שאת אומרת,
רונית.
אתם נורא מדברים על האיך, אני לא כל כך הבנתי את המהות. אני לא כל כך הבנתי מה זה להגביל קריאה לפעולה ברשתות החברתיות מגיל 12. לא כל כך הבנתי את ההגבלת פרסומות לילדים, אז אם אפשר שנייה שתסבירו לי את המהות לפני שאנחנו מתייחסים כבר לאיך.
אחד הדברים שעלו במהלך הוועדה, והייתה התייחסות לזה גם, והציגו לנו פה גם בוועדה בכנסת, זה הרשתות החברתיות ומבצעים שקיימים ברשתות החברתיות לסלפי או לכל מיני דברים שהם רצים באתרים ברשת. אנחנו כתעשייה, זה נקרא call of action, שאתה קורא הרי לפעולה, להצטלם עם מישהו או משהו.
אני רוצה להבין, לא שתסבירו לי מה זה, אני רוצה שתסבירו את ההצעה שלכם בהקשר הזה, את זה לא הבנתי.
אז אני אומרת שההצעה שלנו בהקשר הזה, שכל קריאה לפעולה שתצא מצידנו כחברות תעשיית המזון, תוגבל על ידינו, שוב, אנחנו יודעת, גם פייסבוק היום מוגבל רק אני לא יודעת מאיזה גיל, ואנחנו רואים שהם ילדים בני 9, אני לא יכולה לאכוף את זה.
אבל
אני יכולה לאכוף רק מי שנמצא אצלי.
כי הם לא יודעים בהכרח.
לא, בפייסבוק, אני לא יודעת על איזה גיל הוא מוגבל, מ-13 ואילך.
אבל מי נכנס מגיל 13? אתה מזייף את הגיל ואתה נכנס.
זה מה שאני אומרת, שאני יכולה להתחייב רק למה שאני יכולה לאכוף. שאני אעשה פעולה של להצטלם בסלפי ולשלוח לי או משהו, יהיה כתוב במפורש שזה מוגבל מגיל 12 ואילך. אני לא אאפשר להשתתף.
אגב, למה 12?
כן, כי מה?
כי
גיל 12 מוגדר.
גיל 12 עד 16 או 12 עד 18 כגילאים.
גיל 12 מוגדר על ידי או ה-WHO, או תתקני אותי קרן, על ידי
ב-EU Pledge מצאנו את הסימוכים של ה-12 ובאיגוד במסמך של איגוד המפרסמים העולמי?
אנחנו הלכנו לחפש עוד פעם, אנחנו מחפשים על מה להישען. הלכנו ובדקנו...
כשאתם מסתכלים על המדינות שאתם הצגתם פה, שיש בהן חקיקה אני רואה שחלק...
יש 18, יש 16, יש 14, כל אחד, אצלנו בגיל 18 כבר אנשים נלחמים.
לא, לא יש איפה שזה וולונטרי, 12 איפה שזה לא וולונטרי.
זה נראה לי כזה קצת בלי בשר, זאת אומרת קצת בלי...
מה הציפייה?
לא, זה נראה לי כזה... לא,
פרווה.
נראה לי פרווה.
מה הציפייה? בואי נעשה.
לא, תגידו מה... רגע, שנייה, גם על הגבלת פרסום של מזון לילדים, למה אתם מתכוונים? הגבלת פרסום איפה? הגבלת פרסום...
זה מה שאנחנו אומרים.
כאילו, מה ההצעה? אני לא מבינה את ההצעה.
כשאנחנו הלכנו וניתחנו, ויש לנו טבלה מסודרת, עשינו גם חלופות טבלאות תמרונים, עשינו טבלה מסודרת מבחינת הקריטריונים. הקריטריונים הם מתייחסים לגיל, הם מתייחסים על פי מה אתה מגביל, על פי הרייטינג, על פי השעות, יש פה הרבה דוגמאות, חלקם על פי השעות והרייטינג.
ומה ההצעה שלכם?
שבתוכניות לצורך העניין שבשעות מסוימות, או בתוכניות שאחוז הצופים בהם ילדים או בתוכניות שאחוז הצפייה שלהם, של ילדים בהם הוא מעל 10%, 20%, 30%, הם לא מפרסמים. מוצרים לילדים, זה הכוונה, נכון? זה פחות או יותר, זה התבנית. מה?
גם לא בתי קולנוע לפני סרטים של ילדים?
זה הכל פתוח לדיון, כן, אני מניח שכן, אוקיי.
אנחנו ניסינו לבנות גאנט, לבוא ולהניח מבחינת ההתחייבות שלנו. בהנחה שמדובר בסימון בחזית האריזה כסימון וולונטרי, זה משהו שאנחנו בכפוף לאימוץ ערכי ייחוס, זה משהו שאנחנו יכולים להתחיל לעשות אותו ברגע שיאמצו את ערכי הייחוס, מחר בבוקר להתחיל לשנות את הסימון בחזית האריזה. מבחינת רפורמולציות, שוב, עוד פעם, בכפוף להתוויית תוכנית לאומית, להתחיל לשים את היעד, ולא קשור לכאן, אבל בכל זאת כן, משהו שאנחנו מקדמים אותו, את נושא אפשרי בריא בעבודה. היו לנו כבר פגישות בנושא, כשאנחנו רוצים בשנת 2017, שחברות המזון התחילו בפיילוט בביצוע של הפרויקט. עד 2020 להתחיל לסמן בתו מסכם כזה או אחר, בכפוף לבניית קריטריונים, להמשיך על פי יעדי הרפורמולציות. כאשר אנחנו רוצים שם גם לאורך התהליך, גם תהיה מדידה והערכה של איך הדברים בסופו של דבר משתנים. אחד הדברים שאנחנו למדנו מהתו של אפשרי בריא, שהוא כבר, אני חושבת, מקוים 3 או 4 שנים, שלאורך כל השנים האלה למעשה אין מדידה והערכה אם הוא עזר, לא עזר, אם קונים אותו יותר, לא קונים אותו יותר, וגם פחות יש אולי קמפיין לגביו, זאת אומרת שזה דברים שאנחנו צריכים גם להיות, לעשות להם evaluation. ו-2025, ככה כל פעם הגדלנו את ה-X של הרפורמולציות, שגם שם הדברים האחרים כבר יוטמעו, יהיה אפשר להמשיך ברפורמולציות. אני חושבת שהגאנט שלנו מראה, ומה שאנחנו מנסים להגיד, אנחנו פועלים לקידום אורח חיים בריא, אנחנו רוצים לאמץ גם תוכניות נוספות, בין אם זה דרך אפוד, של להיות ממש חברים באפוד העולמי ולשתף פעולה ולנסות לקדם דברים דרך רשויות מקומיות או המגזר השלישי, שבאמת לחנך לאורח חיים בריא, ובין אם זה דרך אפשרי בריא בעבודה. ואנחנו רוצים לסכם ולהגיד שאפשר לראות מהגאנט. יש פה כמה שחקנים, אתה אומר את זה גם מתחילת הדרך וגם אנחנו. התעשייה מחויבת לתהליך, אבל צריכה גם את המסגרת, צריכה את השיתוף פעולה, צריכה את המחויבות לטווח ארוך של כל המשרדים, על מנת שהמהלך הזה באמת בסופו של דבר יצליח ויהיה לו אימפקט ומחויבות לטווח ארוך. ומאמינים שככל שימשיך השיח המשותף, אז יהיה אפשר באמת להבין את המסגרת, כמו שאת אומרת על ההגבלת פרסום. בואו תגידו מה אתם רוצים, ואנחנו נוכל לעשות את השיעורי בית, מה אפשר לעמוד בזה, מה לא אפשר לעמוד בזה, ולבחון את הדברים.
אוקיי,
ואנחנו לא מאיימים.
בסדר. ואני גם אמרתי כמה פעמים, אנחנו לא רואים בכם האויב. אני כן אומר לכם כמה דברים. דבר ראשון, תודה על זה שהצגתם, ותודה שהתייחסתם לכיוונים שאנחנו מדברים עליהם. דבר ראשון, אנחנו צריכים למלא את השלד של שלושת הנושאים שאנחנו בוועדה מדברים עליהם בתוכן, ולבוא ולומר באמת, להגדיר דבר ראשון מה אנחנו רוצים ברמה של רפורמולציה של נתרן וסוכר ושומנים לא בריאים, ולהגדיר לזה באמת גם יעדים לאומיים, את האופן שבו אנחנו מעגנים את זה, וגם טווחי זמן. בלי ספוילר, הטווחי זמן שלכם הרבה יותר ארוכים ממה שאנחנו חושבים שנכון. אני כן אומר שזו דרישה בעיניי לגיטימית וראויה, לחשוב על כלי סיוע שלנו כממשלה, לתעשייה, בעיקר הקטנה, להתאים את עצמה. אני בכלל חושב שאנחנו כמשרד בריאות צריכים לבחון את עצמנו, איפה אנחנו יכולים לעשות רגולציה שיותר מקלה על ייצור מקומי וייצור של מפעלים קטנים, כי זה בסוף, יש לזה גם את האפקט הבריאותי, וצריך בהחלט לחשוב על הדבר הזה, ואפשר לחבר את הדברים. אז זה בהיבט של רפורמולציה. בהיבט של סימון אנחנו נצטרך לשבת פה בוועדה, יש את המידע שקיבלנו עכשיו. בתחושה שלי יש וזו תחושה ראשונית, יש את העניין של ה-choices, או לפחות או אפשרי בריא שאנחנו רוצים, הוא לא מחליף מידע אחר. כלומר, יש בסוף לתת את המידע בצורה מאוד מאוד ברורה לצרכן, שידע מה התכולה שיש במזון, ויש לתת את האלמנט השיפוטי, שבאלמנט השיפוטי באמת יש את הטווחים של לסמן אם זה טוב או רע, להתייחס לפרמטר מסוים או למכלול. אלה הם דברים שבעיניי במהות שלהם, בשביל זה הקמנו את הוועדה, וצריך לדון בהם פה, וגם אנחנו נרצה להתייעץ עם הציבור, כלומר זה חלק מהדברים שנרצה לעשות, וכמובן נרצה מהלך שהוא בסוף מחייב. והדבר השלישי זה הגבלת פרסום, שמבין כל הדברים זה גם אצלי עוד משהו שצריך להבין בדיוק מה אנחנו רוצים לעשות ואיך אנחנו רוצים לעשות, ובהחלט לפתוח את זה פה לדיון ולהבין באמת את המורכבות של העולם הזה, אבל אלה הם שלושת הדברים המרכזיים. ואני חושב שהדבר הבא שאנחנו צריכים לעשות זה, אנחנו כמשרד צריכים להכין תשתית לדיון על סמך, בוא נגיד ככה, שמענו את הפרק, פחות או יותר גמרנו היום את הסקירה ושמענו את התעשייה, ובעצם הפעם השנייה או השלישית שאנחנו מקדישים חלק ניכר מהישיבה עבורכם, וננסה גם בכל זאת לאפשר למומחית ממקינזי שאתם רוצים להביא לדבר, אבל המפגש הבא כבר צריך להיות מפגש שהוא מדבר על המלצות. ואנחנו ניקח על עצמנו כמשרד, אנחנו נכין את התשתית למה אנחנו חושבים שנכון לדון בו, ואז נתחיל את העבודה בוועדה, וכמו שאמרתי בפעם הקודמת, אנחנו מתכנסים בעצם לסיום. שאלות נוספות של מישהו בשלב הזה?
רק אם אפשר שאלה, בביקור שעשיתם בטרם, דיברנו קצת על חסמי רגולציה, זה פיתוח מוצרים מופחתים.
זה בהחלט, את צודקת בהחלט.
שתקימו איזה שולחן עגול, שנשב איתכם.
אני חושב שזה נכון, אם אנחנו, אמרתי את זה באמת בביקור אצלכם, אם אנחנו יוצרים איזשהו תהליך הדרגתי של רפורמולציה של מזון, צריך בהחלט לראות גם שאנחנו מאפשרים התאמת תקנים באיזשהו טווח זמן, כלומר לאפשר למוצר לחרוג מהתקנים כי הוא בדרך לאיזשהו שינוי בפורמולה שלו.
גם בלחם, אצל ברמן אמרנו גם
ואם יש תקן שאומר שחלה חייבת לכלול סוכר, אנחנו כממשלה בוודאי צריכים לשנות.
איך ננגיש מוצרים יותר בריאים במחירים יותר נמוכים, ואז פרופסור רז הציע שנעשה שולחן באמת לראות איך אפשר חלק מהמוצרים לעשות כאיזשהו...
ברמה של לחם אנחנו אמרנו שאנחנו הולכים למסלול של פיקוח על המחיר, על הלחם המלא. אני כן חושב שצריך לחשוב על אותה נקודה שאיך באמת רואים שלא שוחקים יותר מדי את המאפיות בתהליך הזה, כי אז לא יהיה ייצור, ואז לראות דרך המשחק במרווח, אולי לפקח על המרווח, אולי לפקח לקבוע מחיר מינימום, אני לא יודע, צריך מחיר מינימום של היצרן למשווק. אז צריך, יש פה עולם תוכן שצריך לוודא שהוא קורה כדי באמת להבטיח שהמוצר מגיע, ויש עוד מוצרים נוספים שאנחנו אכן צריכים לדון גם עליהם.
I wanted to ask, we have an expert from abroad who made more than 500 articles about all these issues, and I think he ought to reply to what he spoke about Mexico and about marketing. Because I translate most of it, but I think it's good that, he spoke in English, he could understand, so he should understand what you spoke about. So I think he knows more or less what you spoke about. I think we ought to listen to him.
I just wanted to make 2 points. On the social market, on the marketing, the voluntary marketing, there have been around 800 studies done on your voluntary marketing around the world, in Europe, in Mexico, in many countries. And there have been meta-analyses looking at all of them. And most of them find they don't work. That some companies do a little bit of it, some do more, but without a it's not effective. That the companies don't. Now maybe this is too many publications, and I could send you some.
Even in a small market like Israel?
But not in Israel, but in other countries. In European countries, in Australia, and New Zealand, and Mexico, US, Canada, all the studies say the same thing. So that it's very complex. And without a regulation, some companies may do a little what you say, but others won't. And that's the general literature now, and consensus, pretty much the health literature, and published in very eminent journals. On the second question on Mexico, I gave the published literature. Even 2 studies done by the industry, the conclusions were funny and were against what we found. But the results in the paper were identical to our results. And so your report of the increase in sales did go up, but the population went up so much that the per capita sales went down. And so there's a new publication coming up just with your data, using with the population. So it's not whether you've grown your sales, but it's how much people buy per capita. Now we're doing a study that will have blood, and will show you the effects on diabetes and other things. But the fact is that we estimate from some analyses that there'll be a large effect in Mexico, even with a tiny tax, and we wanted a 20% tax. So I think...
What's the consumption per capita change? Because we have...
It's not on the regular average consumer. It's like around 17% for the low income. But the high consumers, the people that were consuming 600 to 1,000 milliliters a day, they went down around 28%, 30%. So the big consumers have gone down a lot, and that's the ones, that's the adolescents, the young adults that are getting the problem. So on the average, it's small because it's a tiny tax, but for the big consumers, it's a big effect.
הצעה לקראת השלב שאנחנו בעצם בדיונים, אני חושבת שזה היה בעיניי מאוד נכון וראוי שתגיבו בעצם להצעות שכבר נידונו וכבר נמצאות באוויר ואפילו יש עליהן ניסיון לגבי העמדה שלכם. אבל עלה כאן ככה בקטנה גם את הדברים הפרואקטיביים שבעצם זאת הזדמנות. ואני חושבת שכאן היוזמה או הרעיונות יכולים גם לבוא מכם, כלומר בקטע של הדברים הפרואקטיביים שאתם חושבים לעשות בהינתן שיש מציאות שהולכת להשתנות. כי אני חושבת שיהיה לזה ערך באמת להביא גם את הצד
מה אנחנו עושים אתם כבר מכירים, נכון?
כן, אבל אני לא מתכוונת בזירות אחרות, בזירה של המוצרים. כן, לא בזירות, מה עושים בעבודה, מה עושים, זה זירות שאנחנו מטפלים בנפרד.
להוסיף על מה שאמרת, יש עבודה שנעשתה, צריך להביא כמו הצעות של העסקים הקטנים ושל טיוב ושל מדען וכדומה. ודבר נוסף, אפרופו הנושא של הפרסומות, בשנה האחרונה נעשתה עבודה מאוד גדולה, דו צדדית. זאת אומרת, ההתאחדות לקחה 2 סטודנטים שמיפו את כל נושא הפרסומות בעולם, ורונית העבירה את החומרים שלה, ועשינו חילופי חומרים בכל הנושא של פרסומות. זאת אומרת, אני מציע שלקראת הדיון הבא, החומרים האלה הגולמיים, תקבלו אותם בצורה מסודרת, גם מהמשרד וגם מההתאחדות. יש שם ממש מיפוי של שנה שכל נושא הפרסומות תהיה יותר.
בסדר גמור. טוב, תודה רבה לכולם, תודה רבה לכולם.